Hi there.
Hi,
Is that Jan?
that's Jan. How
Okay.
are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So
You are
this
Bob, I understand.
I am, yes. This is, I guess, the inaugural Replicators meeting, and I thought I'd take the opportunity since Jan reached out via Steen, who's in the
Yeah,
top right there for the viewers on YouTube, to maybe answer some live questions. Martin Kemp, who's MK, will be doing a replication in the UK, and Henk will be part of the replication team in Holland. I'm hoping to get a unit out to California for one of the other MFMP researchers to have a go. He has a process mass spectrometer, a serious device, so we should be able to look at any potential elements that are synthesized if that is what's going on in the reactor. So I'm just going to check people can hear me on YouTube, and if you can speak as well, Jan and Steen, and anyone else that wants to, just to check everyone's getting the sound. So Artifact says sound is good from my point of view. Steen, do you want to say something? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, nice to be here. Sten Ingwersen from Copenhagen. Just had a meeting earlier today with Jan Kapjan, and I learned that Jan is trying to reproduce the thunderstorm generator, and we thought it would be a good idea to get in contact with you to get some information on the technical side.
Fantastic. Jan, do you want to introduce yourself?
yeah, I'm part of Sten's group. We have been discussing free energy for a long time, and I've been working with free energy for what is it, 25 years. I'm also a water researcher and a retired professor. And so we are a group of capable Norwegian retired people who want to do something useful. And we have become interested in the Bendel device. So we're trying to do it at the moment. And actually, you see here that we have the spheres ready.
Oh, very nice. Well done.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're just trying to get some questions clear before we start.
I think
And it
that's
was
very
very
wise.
interesting. If you are working with the same kind of device, we'd be very interested in you know, sharing some experiences.
Awesome. Excellent. So might I ask what you're a professor of?
Innovation.
Innovation. Well, definitely
Yeah.
this fits that bill, doesn't it?
I've been doing innovations all my life. Actually, I've been running an innovation company as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, Kishan, you're new. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, how you doing? My name's Kish. I've just been introduced to this technology by a friend of mine, Darren. Massively interested in what its capabilities are, how it works, and how it's going to be moving forward, and if there's anything I could do to actually help with this project, with any of these projects, in fact, and anything that anybody's actually trying to move forward. I've been trying to work within this sort of field of systemic change for a good 15, 20 years now. So yeah, this is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone's got to say.
Fantastic. And Martin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Martin Camp. I am just a bloke in a shed. I had a crack at the GE and then obviously followed through with the thunderstorm generator and had some interesting results. Think it was a bit of a fluke, haven't been able to get it to happen a second time, so we'll see.
Henk, are you able to talk there? Okay, so we are actually waiting for...
Yes,
Oh, go on,
yeah.
Henk.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a little blurry. Bad lightning.
Look great to me, Henk.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, yeah, some people in this blog maybe know me. I've been working with the MFMP already for a few years now. it started off with the Vega experiments, and I'm still working on that one. So that's very fascinating. Plasma is very fascinating. Everything happens, but difficult to understand. And indeed, it's all about the energy in a way. So we don't know actually where all these energies come from. This free energy is still, in my opinion, a mystery, except from the Lennard processes, maybe, because that's like fission fusion type of reactions in a can, or in a plasma, or now we can see in the thunderstorm reactor. And that's very interesting, because the whole story with GEET and the thunderstorm generator is, in my opinion, fairly the same process. I found out that in the GEET, what I have at home, there is no turbulence, so no vortex, no working, and that's probably the case with the thunderstorm generator. There is blowing exhaust sphere, and then it starts spinning, and then the rest is still a magic, because what's really going on, well, Bob can explain, of course, but yeah, right. There are things to find out what's really going on. We like to know how it's going, especially from my point of view, how it's going on in the electrical way. I mean, where do these evos come from? They must come from somewhere in the system. They are living there. Are they going? So this is a process thing, where it is, where they influence each other, where is this process starting, and so on. So these are the questions. And for me, it's important to know the dimensions. I mean, I have a little generator, and I have also a 1300 cc motor, and that needs a bigger GEET or thunderstorm generator. But what is the size? Mm-hmm. That kind of questions. And yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Tammy, do you want to step in there? Introduce yourself. You need to unmute. Okay, come back. Peter, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, sure. Actually, I have to be honest, I just started following you, and I honestly, much of what Hank said doesn't make sense, but I understand enough that I know that I want to stick around.
Great. Fantastic. And thank you. And Ken, do you want to say a word before we get into the Q&A? I can't hear your mic. Nope, still can't. No. Lithnik, do you want to come in there?
Hello.
Hi.
I am from Norway, and I've been following this technology since I heard it from a Joe Rogan podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I'm just learning as much as I can about it, and I want to eventually build a thunderstorm generator myself.
Fantastic. Excellent.
What's your name?
Well, I want to stay anonymous for the moment, because I have a really hard time explaining this to anyone without sounding like a nutcase. So I'm playing it safe at the moment.
Yeah, sometimes it's just best to admit you're a nutcase to start with, and you'd never have that problem.
Yeah,
I'm from Norway as well. You see. That's
yeah. We can chat about it. I can send you my name in the chat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I don't know Malcolm is just saying he can't get on, so I'm going to advise him to go to YouTube so he can comment there. So he can text there. We have Anthony Williams, DIY Projects with Chauxis, Corky, Goss, Paul O'Neill, Nathan Ford, David Biltier. Hi, Nathan. Hi, David. Fom. So Fom is actually, he's actually on, Malcolm is actually on YouTube already. So he's just struggling to get onto our chat here. So he is potentially following there. Tony Giaboni is with us. Matthew Reynolds, Artifact, Mr. Gate Mode, Misunderstood. So we've got a good quorum. We've got 46 people viewing outside of the chat. So just for those that joined late, both on the YouTube stream and on the Zoom call, this was instigated by Steen, who invited me, I believe it was in 2017, to come and give a talk to the Danish Engineering Society. Was that right?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and go on, carry on.
We had a meeting, a very interesting meeting on LENR, different various aspects of LENR, which was quite interesting. Yeah. So
the fascinating thing for me was it was one of the first times I really discussed what I felt about the importance of ball lightning. And in that very same presentation, I showed an ancient Tesla globe. And how is it so that we get to this point now that all of these different systems, in my view, and this speaks to Norway because it was Norwegian evidence from Histalen from 2003, where they found this ball lightning had impacted the ground, and in the ground soil sample they found this iron-rich crenellated sphere. So it was actually Norway that gave me the idea that the natural form of ball lightning has at its core this magnetic core of an iron-rich crenellated sphere. And then we proceeded to find this in a wide range of systems, be it in electrolysis with 2 tungsten electrodes, in potassium carbonate, in light water, and in an alumina. So there's no iron in there. Whereas this, actually in that case, it's assumed to be iron because the scientists at the time didn't have an SEM that had an EDS, but looking at the color, it was probably that. And then we saw it in a range of other systems, our microwave dusty plasma reactor, and then we saw it in how should we put this, an ultrasonic reactor, and then we saw it in Henk's Vega experiment, and that actually showed the other elements of ball lightning, the calcium and the silicon, that you see in the spectrum of the only spectrum of ball lightning. And so when I gave my talk in Zurich on Malcolm Bendel's technology, the reason I got interested with that was essentially people have been saying, you're doing this GEET thing. Now there's this, and actually Henk was leading the charge on that to a degree, and I know Martin Kemp also gave that a good shot. But what happened was it seemed to be doing some similar things to the Global Environmental Energy Technology, the GEET. It seemed to be simpler, but people were saying, you need to reach out to this guy Malcolm, because I think there's something similar going on here. And well, I thought to myself, yeah, well, it's difficult enough with the GEET, and we're already on that thread. But then someone did some testing with Malcolm's technology in North Carolina, and they couldn't explain the results. And then someone at Los Alamos suggested that they reached out to the MFMP, and so they reached out to me. I spoke to the people in North Carolina. I said, well, it's the reason I did that was because they sent me this sphere that was tested about 8 years ago in Thailand. And it had these glowing objects coming out, which looked remarkably like the structures that we had seen in Henk Urian's Vega experiment and in the Vega experiment of David Butler, who's also on YouTube. And so it was a case of, oh God, now I have to get involved. And so Malcolm was gracious enough to allow me to join him as an independent in Zurich. And I said, look, Malcolm, I will not tell you when I'm arriving. I'm not telling you when I'm leaving. I'm not telling you where I'm staying, right? And I then said, I will say what I want to say. You don't get to vet it beforehand, and you don't know what I'm going to say. And I'm not going to tell you. And so I got up and I said, but basically, I think this is ball lightning based on the evidence that I can see. That's why I'm interested. And I think that based on what I've been able to establish that, and I can go through some of those slides for clarification. I said that I think that, one of the signatures of this is this iron-rich crenellated sphere, and I showed the example from the Embla 2002 study of the ground survey in Hestalen as my starting point on that part of the journey. And it was then that he, a few weeks later, revealed that he had this 24-inch sphere from an 8-year test. It'd been only done about 500 hours during those eight years, but it was on a Perkins diesel generator. I think it's like 400 kVA electric generator. And he had cut this thing open and sent me a couple of videos. I said, look, stop. You're going to contaminate it. Just wrap it up. I'll come over. I got the next plane over I could brought on my microscopes and macro photography equipment. And I knew what I wanted to see, and it was structures that were observed by us independently. And then we later found out that it was observed by Takaaki Matsumoto, these kind of structures here. And within seconds of turning the macro lens onto the inside of the outside and the outside of the inside of this large thunderstorm generator, these structures were revealed. And I said, right, okay, this is getting really interesting now. I need to look to see what's in the center of those structures, and you need to cut this thing up. And he goes, oh, I want this in the Smithsonian Museum as an artifact. And I said, well, thank you, that's it, I'm done. My responsibility's over, I can walk away now. And then a couple of days later, he sent someone over with some 2-inch squares from this. And I think he was going to cry on me for quite a bit of time. But I chucked it under the microscope. The live microscope session is there, and within a few seconds we found the iron-rich crenellated microspheres, which are at the center of these hexagonal and pentagonal structures on the outside of the inside and the inside of the outside. But on the outside of the inside, it would appear that it's grabbing the steel and it is forming these spheres, but the spheres contain chromium and other elements of the steel at that point. But on the inside of the outside, they actually are essentially pure iron and oxygen, like are synthesized in the natural ball lightning, in my view. So that's kind of brings us up to date. There's been a lot of experimentation since. In terms of, so Malcolm's just sent me a picture and says his Google account has been disabled. So that's it's what he has to face on a regular basis. Okay. There's not a lot of friendlies out there when it comes to what Malcolm's doing, let's put it like this. But I can tell you that the King of Saudi Arabia is a friendly, and I would imagine that the people of Norway are friendlies with the technology that removes the main reason for arguing that ICE engines, internal combustion engines, should be removed from the road. And actually, there was a report actually in the New York Times. Was it the New York? No, not the New York Times. The Times New York. I don't know. One of the New York papers that was referring to a 2022 report that said because of the extra weight of the cars that are running on electric batteries, they produce more pollution than a modern exhaust from tire wear than it comes out as particulates from the exhaust, right? So even if they have solar panels and bird choppers producing the electricity, they actually produce more particulates in the city than a modern car exhaust. And so that's with Norway having some of the highest concentrations of electric cars in the world. I think they should maybe consider this factor. Of course, this would be remediated if they could double the amount of charge storage per unit cell. But it's something that people overlook when they make these pronouncements. Oh, we're all going to move to electric. Yeah, but how do you produce all the chargers, and the grid won't hold it? It doesn't matter. Only 1 in 100 people will have a car, and everyone will have to lease it off them. That's how you solve it. So there are ways around these things. Okay, so it would appear that Malcolm can't join us. He will have to run on the replay, which is sad. If there's a question that I think he's best placed to ask, I will ask him, and I'll maybe try and bring him in on my phone, and we can ask him that way, I guess. All right, so Jan, do you want to fire away with your first question?
Yeah. My first question is regarding, you can see the chart here.
Yeah.
Could the generator be turned upside down? Would there be anything wrong with that?
Oh, we've got Malcolm with us. Hello, Malcolm.
Yeah. Hi.
Can the generator be turned upside down?
Yeah.
I think it is upside down in the actual versions.
That would reduce the length of this piping here, and would make it much more convenient to make
honestly,
restricted
Jan, in the versions that I've seen, it is the other way up. Yeah, Malcolm, you can confirm.
Sorry.
Oh, right.
That's it. But the question is the same. Could it be turned upside down?
Malcolm, do you want to answer that? Can the thunderstorm generator, rather than feeding the water vapor and air in the bottom, can it be fed into the top? Okay, he's still got issues there. So essentially, what I've seen on the implementations I've seen on small generators, it goes into the bottom, and it's being sucked through the thunderstorm generator out of the top, and it just has a short bridge into the carburetor with a Venturi modified block in between the normal carburetor and the air intake, or the fuel and air intake of the generator.
Yes, I know that's been pictured all around, but if you could turn it upside down, then the size of the whole assembly would be much more elegant.
I think the size of the whole assembly can be a lot smaller if Malcolm can answer where things are now. I can't really talk about it. It's his situation, but you might not.
I'm here.
Malcolm, okay. Can you answer? Can you make a shorter tube?
Yeah, we have the latest one, because we've been basically just stymied from our. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
You're absolutely crystal clear.
Okay, because I think it's not being contested on several levels here. Interesting. Yep. Anyway, as you say, intrigue, more intrigue.
So can you make it shorter is the question.
Yeah, we have now the and I'll just go in that. What we're doing is we're producing them for everyone so that they'll all be the same standard, and we can do our secret sources. And well, I spent a week with Martin Fleischmann, and so I've taken his advice on the preparation of the materials by annealing and then pressure quenching. So we create beautiful cubes and then infuse them with argon gas and other few magic things. So basically, the new one is on the new patent, which has just been put in, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So basically, we put a PCT in as well, a patent cooperation treaty. So now we're covered. The new design is basically amplifies the sort of the reverse flows, or so we got clockwise against anti-clockwise for the exhaust coming in and clockwise for it coming into the engine. So that is a 4-inch sphere with a 2-inch joiner and to another 4-inch sphere, and inside that is a 3-inch sphere with a 3-inch joiner to a 3-inch sphere. So, and then it's got a 2-inch sphere independent in the center of the 2 4-inch spheres. So, and the reason basically I wanted to build the devices for everyone is because then we know what the standard of the device is, we know what the composition of the stainless steel is, and everyone that does test work will have comparable results. Therefore, if someone finds something that works with that, we know that it's the same machine in devices that we've sent to other parts of the world.
Malcolm, can I just... Yep. So basically what Malcolm is saying is, I discussed with him earlier today, and the intention is that you will receive one of the officially made units to test, if that's okay, Jan.
Yeah.
And that will be the same for Martin Kemp as well. So now the patent-free version, which you have in your hand, you're welcome to go and make that. But if you want to be part of the global testing team that is looking to be able to compare data and also work out niggles, because it is essentially a prototype technology. There's a lot of room for improvement. And you seem, Malcolm, you weren't here, maybe you heard the introduction of Jan on the YouTube, but he is has been an innovation expert all of his life and a professor in that subject, and he's got time on his hands. So I think he's probably keyed into a lot of people that could bring their minds and their ingenuity to bear on maybe improving aspects of that. So Malcolm, if you want to carry on, that's great. But the news is that you're going to be getting a stubby anyway, and that's much more compact. So,
is there any time indication of when that will be available?
The first one rolled off tonight or today on the production line, and we intend to make 30 of them, and as complete units with the bubbler, so that. Because what I didn't want to happen, or what's already happened, is people, decide that, oh well, it's easier to make them out of steel, not stainless steel, or and so, and it's quite, the small things are very important, like the angle of attack on the transitions being the 51.84 degrees, and just the thickness of the stainless steel that can be welded as 3 mil is the optimum for welding and for manufacturing, for spinning. So it's a compromise all the way down. But the thing is that you have to make a home for the plasmoids, and they don't like crooked buildings. So they like nice squares, so that when they sit in the center, well, there is a center to sit in, I should put it that way. Because if you have a stress lattice there, obviously you don't have a center anymore. And they don't like crooked homes. So basically, that's very, very important. It's a subtle thing, but it's something that we, and Martin Fleischmann told me, Malcolm, spend 6 months preparing your materials and 1 hour doing your test work, not 1 hour preparing your materials and 6 months trying to get it to work.
Yeah, I mean, there's also some other things that's come out of it. That stainless steel obviously has a very low thermal conduction relative to other metals. And what was identified in one of the early prototypes that Malcolm had, and you can see a video on the MFMP's YouTube channel, there was a pulling in of the central tube on one of the spheres. And when you think about it, when you have a very long tube and the inner tube is hotter than the outer tube, you have a differential thermal coefficient of expansion. And I calculated that it had moved 6 millimeters, and that was the differential in thermal expansion between the two links. So by making the thing a lot smaller, it reduces any chance of that happening, and in stainless steel it reduces the chance of that happening. But there's another thing that's going on, I believe, when you have the flashing to steam, when you have iron in the mix, and we know we've got iron in the mix because we're seeing iron-rich crenellated spheres, and obviously there's iron in the steel, over 600 degrees, you're going to get thermocatalytic splitting of water. And so if you've got a much longer tube, you may not have that early interaction between the water that's entrained in the water coming out of the bubbler and the moisture in that air that's coming out and the steel, because it'll just be a slow transition. You want that flash to steam to be as high speed as possible. And whilst I'm talking about that, it makes sense to go on to one of the key aspects that I've identified for the bubbler. So in my Zurich talk, I spoke about the fact that both in Thailand and the Maldives, the moisture content was almost at the limit of what you can get in air, and when you see ball lightning in Hestalen, it's also when the Italians were doing their research there, it was almost at the maximum that you can get in Norway. Now, the thing is, engines will run more efficiently with cold air. Why? The reason is the air is denser, which means it has more oxygen in there. So that's why if you're in a cold climate, you can actually be slightly more efficient, but they can also be more efficient with moisture. But if the moisture flashes to steam in the wrong place and you get lower density air going into the engine, that can lower the efficiency, even though there's moisture in there and it's reported that that can happen. Now, if you can imagine that the engine on one part of the 4-stroke cycle is sucking the air through the bubbler and it's producing the bubble. Let's put the notion of what that is doing aside and just say that when that water, that in highest concentration of water that you can carry in the air, it's literally laden and it's also entraining water with it. When that hits and flashes to steam, what does it do? Well, it has two ways it can go. One into the engine, which is already sucking on it, and the other one is back out through where the air came from. But unfortunately, there's a load of water in the way, and that punches down. There is a water hammer effect, and it acts like a one-way valve. So you get a much higher pressure of whatever's coming into the engine than you would ordinarily do if it was just air coming through and you were spraying moisture into it. So it accentuates that whole process. Now, is it going to hydrogen and oxygen because of the thermocatalytic splitting? Maybe. Those things can be determined maybe with spectral analysis later down the line. But I think this is a large component. You are getting that higher density of air in there. You're getting the water, and the water that may also be thermocatalytically splitting. And so that is part of the recovery of the energy that comes out of the engine, because if you are creating hydrogen, it has the highest heat capacity. So it's going to be able to carry a lot of heat in, but then maybe the heat would then lower the density in there. But you don't get this problem because you have this ability to have this kind of one-way valve that's going on. So from my point of view, the bubbler's main role is to increase the water content of the air coming in, and then to act as a one-way valve once that flashes to steam. Malcolm, maybe you've got something to add there, or you probably disagree with me.
Well, I think the thing is that no, obviously the part of the bubbler, which is plasmoid generator, part of it is believe that the imploding bubbles are actually that the obviously there's several points in the device where the plasmoids can be generated. I think the artifacts in the spheres confirm that we do have ball lightning, and we do have the atomic reconstruction, as I like to call it. But so I think that where that happens is still to be. There's a lot of sort of proper. Once we have better facilities, and some proper analysis of what's going on. I mean, I do think that the cavitation bubbles are, a start in and plasmoids are generated in the thunderstorm generator, which has the multi-axis shear that Bob is talking about. Which is achieved by the popped scrubbers to give that, just because it's the simplest thing to do. And obviously, it's only the bubbles you can't see that actually work in this because of anything too big, probably over a micron is just too big. So, it has to be a symmetrical collapse, and that has to happen there. But because of the design of the thunderstorm generator, it can also produce plasmoids. So where the plasmoids are produced, and but they have to be obviously they're forming ball lightning, which means they're aggregating. I think they're definitely aggregating within the thunderstorm generator, or propagating, because of the whole thunderstorm generator is you got a warm, hot front against a cold front, and you generate lightning, and that lightning does the work in the thunderstorm generator, but you also do have the charge coming into the liquid in the bubbler. I think that the proportions of the contributions for plasmoid generation are up for grabs, but the fact is they're there, and I'm sort of quite happy to go either way. But I do know it doesn't work without the bubbler. So
yeah, I mean, I think the bubbler is absolutely key, and there is a potential opportunity to massively improve the ionizer. So if we can address that and start at the beginning, as it were. Jan, you had a question on the ionizer.
Me?
Yes. You sent an email.
No, I have no question on ionizer.
Yeah, you asked, could you use LED bulbs?
Is the material important?
In Malcolm's first design, it didn't seem to be important. I suggested using something like titanium oxide, i.e. if you get titanium, then you might be able to get photocatalytic splitting of water if you had a high enough energy photon. So I think it was using standard steel or plastic.
Yeah.
Now, you wrote a question which was, can you use an LED bulb? So if you go, these questions are all answered in my Zurich presentation. I suggested using these E272385 SMD LEDs. They're used for sterilizing stuff. You want the one that doesn't produce ozone, in my view, although I encourage people to try both types. Obviously, the ones that do produce the higher frequencies can damage the eyes, and so I'd prefer people who weren't experienced with these using these things and having the right eye protection, or making sure you don't look at them, don't use them. But in my view, what you want to do is to create as much hydrogen as possible without ionizing the oxygen that's in the air naturally. So you don't want one that produces ozone, because oxygen has a paramagnetic moment that is 18,760 or 18,714 times stronger than the free proton magnetic moment, whereas a single oxygen radical is only 658 times, and ozone is only 351 times. So producing ozone is absolutely not what you want to do, because you want that paramagnetic nature of oxygen to bind these clusters together to make the core structures that help produce the ball lightning, in my view. So that's one. You do potentially want to split water that's in the moist air based on the moisture that's in there to produce extra hydrogen, because any extra hydrogen you can get for low input energy on the way in is going to help the process. Why? Because the Russians have found that the magnetotoroelectrical radiation is 2,000 to 4,000 times easier to create from hydrogen isotopes than any element isotope from lithium-6 onwards. Lithium-7 onwards. And so having the hydrogen in there is a good thing. Like I say, there could be thermocatalytic splitting of water when it hits the steel, rather iron, when it's over 600, 650 degrees C. So yes, LEDs would be more efficient. I suggested ones that have a much higher output for a lower input energy. But these are kind of rounding energy errors, if you know what I mean, on the amount of energy you're generating when you're looking at something between a 25 watt bulb and a 5 watt bulb, and you know, it's much bigger the gain that you're getting on the other parts of the system. Well, will that over time prove out to be very important? I don't know, but clearly one could argue that above the cloud surface at least there is UV. Of course, there's some UV that produces ozone, but that typically is higher up. You know, the ozone layer is higher up. You know, so is it the UV that we're talking about that's at this exciting the air level that's important? That I think if it works at all, that's probably why, and we can accentuate that. Then when it comes into the bubble itself, Malcolm's absolutely right. He, in the big systems, he would use air bubbler like this. This is in fact one from one of the Perkins devices, and then this would go through secondary things to create hydrodynamic shear. So if you've got a bubble coming up and it's big and it goes through a load of pan scrubs, which is what Malcolm typically uses, the bubble is actually forced to fragment as it goes up and go through a shearing process. The interesting thing is when you get that back pressure, that slam, when you get the flashing to steam, in my view, then that forces down and slams down on the water, forcing those bubbles to collapse. And they're not only collapsing in a free volume of water, they might be collapsing very violently onto those pan scrubs as well. And in the better systems that Malcolm's built that I have seen, where he hasn't got leaks, and maybe Malcolm can talk to that in a bit, you are able to capture that pressure change rather than it spit water everywhere and leak. Malcolm, could you talk a bit about the concern that you might have for replicators on getting the sealing right on the bubbler?
Yeah, it's actually it's been quite an interesting, surreal thing. It's because it's like, you know, it's proved that I'm actually definitely from another universe, because on this planet Earth, you Earthlings seem to have trouble accepting that, you know, vacuums are very hard to, like, oh no, we've got a fitting on there, of course we won't leak any stuff. So 90% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, it's like with people, and I've sent it to a lot of people around the world. I haven't been there when they built it, and they say, oh, it's not working. I said, you got a vacuum leak? Oh no, we've tightened up all the joints. You know, we haven't got a vacuum leak. And so I say to them, okay, you have got a vacuum leak because I can see your bubbler, you know, and it's not working properly. The reason it's not working properly is because the engine piston, I know, is going down. It is operating. So that's not being translated through the bubbler. So what I found was it's very difficult to explain to people that even though the fitting seems like it's tight, I always get them to get some epoxy and epoxy all the joins, literally put them upside down and epoxy it that way, then put them right, wait till that overnight, and then turn it the other way and epoxy it, because you have to make sure that all the joins are completely vacuum proof. Because there, I think, and it's two things I think too, is that the as Bob says, the flash steaming probably happens in a fraction of a second, that pressure pulse, and so, you know, that can sort of, you know, find the smallest hole possible. But then you've got obviously the vacuum as well, which is a lot of the compression fittings that you use for water pipes, you know, aren't designed for vacuum. So we're trying to encourage and move ourselves to all air conditioning fittings and air conditioning copper pipe. As Bob pointed out, that I think that pipe that the pipe is actually usually about 90% copper, not 60% like in some water pipe. So you want the higher purity of copper, so that you have the effect that that the high electromagnetic field, even though it's shielded on the plasmoids, is that they induce an electromagnetic current in the copper, which keeps them off the copper. So
the copper is also diamagnetic. And then the third point is if the plasmoids are actually condensing or the exotic vacuum objects are condensing within some copper piping, they could emit up to 2 kilo electron volt photons, and the copper oxide is able to photoelectrically emit 2 kilo electron volt photons, and they can photoelectrically cause from copper if it's negatively biased electrons. And so then you have a self-feeding process where it's actually condensing electrons, catching kinetic energy out of them, and then upsampling that to high energy photons, then forcing more electrons to be released. So you can actually, and that's part of one of the embodiments of Ken Shoulders for generating excess electricity from exotic vacuum objects. So,
yeah, and that
go on.
thing with the with the water samples we took in a completely bizarre experiment where we actually took tip leachate.
Tip leachate. That's the, if you imagine you've got 50 years of rubbish in a tip, and then water is seeping through that, and at the bottom there's some horrible stuff at the bottom. 50 years of rubbish in a tip. Oh, and then I'm hearing myself. That's coming from. Thank you. Go on. Yes, you were saying about the leachate, Malcolm.
Yeah. So, and that's in my notes. I just make sure everyone knows that if the people want to have a look at my 15-hour lecture series, that's on. I still think it's on HowTube. We're trying to put up a new website because we've had enormous trouble with attacks, even tonight. Both physical attacks, and anyway, you can read the book called The Shaman. If you go to the strikefoundation.earth website, and now we're putting up a new website, strikefoundation.org. What I have found out, because I've been so busy pushing ahead with all the conferences and builds, that I'm now having a sort of a 2-month period of sitting down and finishing the patents and on the paperwork. And I've had the time now to have a look, and most of my files on my original website have been corrupted. Yeah, like I didn't realize people couldn't get into them and couldn't watch the videos, and so basically, while I've been trying to put the stuff out to the world, there's been people trying to close down, obviously the access to that information. So it's been but now we're on that, and we'll have another website up, which could be called strikefoundation.org. So we'll be having all of those, and hopefully we'll be able to keep on top of the corruption of all the files and stuff, and just keep a better eye on that, because had 3 conferences last year, and plus trying to get the patents done. And so, but I did, I just did finish one this week, just spent a week on it, and got another one away, and then now I'm working on the implosive turbine, which is we should have that finished next week, the implosive turbine patent.
Okay, so it's all moving ahead in the right direction. Okay, so once we've got the water coming out, it flashes to steam. In my Zurich presentation, I suggested that potentially the way it could be working is in a similar fashion to the Armstrong electrostatic boiler. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Armstrong electrostatic boiler was invented in 1842. That is a long time before the Tesla coil was invented in 1891, or the Van de Graaff generator was invented in 1931. So it was 89 years ahead of the Van de Graaff generator. Now, the Tesla coil and Van de Graaff generator can typically produce potentially up to around 2 million volts. The Armstrong generator was regularly reported apparently to produce sparks in standard temperature and pressure air of 2 foot long, which calculates out at about 1.83 million volts. So you're looking at something that was equivalent in terms of charge separation capability to a high-end Tesla coil or large-scale Van de Graaff generator, except this can produce it on demand. You flick your switch and the sparks are generated. And have you seen that, Jan? Have you seen the image of one of these devices?
I don't know actually what you're talking about there.
So let me just show you. I have it prepared here, so that will make things easier. So I will share the screen here. Okay. And
Bob, that goes back to J.J. Thomson or Lord Kelvin, paper on charge separation.
I think his Armstrong was around a little bit before they did their work, actually.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that J.J. Thomson's paper talks about that, that it was, way before he wrote his paper, but his paper was on charge separation. That's my point.
Yeah.
Just with droplets or with copper pellets.
Right. Okay, here we go. I did that the wrong way. Right, it's still sharing this screen. I don't want to share the screen. I just want to share the window. Share window. So essentially this device, it had a boiler, and in fact, I'm going to just move this. Can I move that up? Why is it not allowing me to move it up? It's because it's doing that, isn't it? Right, I'm going to move it up so the people on YouTube can see it. Then I'm going to try and share it in here. Share screen, and I want that one. Is it going to let me share it? Right, okay. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see Mr. Armstrong in this image here with the water value level on here and the pressure gauge here. This is his coal burning in this slot, and it produces a head of steam literally. And he has a valve and it goes through this thing. Now it's suggested that this has cooling water in here. I'm minded to think either it's cooling water or the steam goes straight through, heats it all up, the water that's in there, and the balance of the steam goes out through the exhaust or the chimney, and it's flashing that water to steam. Anyway, regardless, the device is insulated by these glass legs, and it has spikes opposite the nozzles, which collects the static charge, and then that goes over to an emitter over here, and this again is also on a glass rod. This is one that was in Italy, in Florence, and there was floods. It was repaired and then never to go on permanent display again. So you may be able to get access to this structure. But you can see the head steam here. This would be where maybe your water volume was, and this would be where your pressure gauge was. This is probably where you would burn your combustible material. And you can see this, it looks like brass with these nozzles that are probably in a cut-in with a chamfer here and some sort of inlet such that it would produce cavitation pulses coming out. It produces basically solitons of steam, but as it goes from the extreme high pressure in here to out here, it will be flashing to steam, and that allows for this charge collection here. So that process is extreme and is producing intense charge. And here I'll just note, because we are in here, this is the kind of light bulb that I was referring to earlier, the LED version, but it's the germicidal UV bulbs, but the non ozone producing ones. And here there's very little H2 in the atmosphere, but there is water vapor. And I was showing here that this is a Hessdalen light here. If I play that, you can see it maybe. And one of these Hessdalen lights hit the ground. This is the iron-rich crenellated sphere, and this is the water vapor in Hessdalen. At that time, it was at the peak when this sample was gathered in 2002. And here is the high levels of moisture content in the air in central Thailand and the Maldives in those particular environments. And so really you just want to get up as high as you can on the amount of humidity you've got in the water that you're flashing through. So I think that's all I wanted to say there. Does that make sense now with the Armstrong electrostatic boiler?
Yeah, looks interesting.
Yeah, so essentially what you want to do is get charge separation. Ken Shoulders is very, very clear that the key thing to do to create exotic vacuum objects is charge separation. Henk creates charge separation using a dual Cockcroft-Walton situation with a DC bias in his device, and so he has pulses. And I haven't talked about this before, but there's a very classic image of caught in Sochi of a ball lightning coming down, and then it does a little squiggle, and it comes down, does a little squiggle, and it comes down, does a little squiggle, and comes down and hits the ground. And in a recent Russian presentation which I published, they talk about the fact that the reason it does that little squiggle is because of the pulse discharges of other lightning in the environment. Okay, so it's actually just trying to get from the cloud down to ground, but it has some breaks in movement. And when thinking about what we see in the Henk Jurgens Vega experiment, we see the same kind of thing, these little squiggles, little squiggles, little squiggles. And I think that's because of the pulses that he's generating on the higher voltage. So, you know, we've got that. So my point being is that you need charge separation going on. It produces these ball lightning structures. Now, they can be seen or unseen. The question we have is, in the big thunderstorm generator, are these things actually seen, or are they kind of like ghost-like objects? And I would argue that they are, if you can imagine your standard Tesla ball like this, and you put your fingers on it and you get the little streamers coming to your fingers, it isn't that you're going to be able to see these things, it's that they're there and they have an intense magnetic flux tube that links from one side to the other side with magnetic charge of one type on one side, magnetic charge of another on the other side. When I say magnetic charge, it's a pseudo-magnetic monopole. It's not a real monopole, but it does the functioning of a magnetic monopole. And there also would be an incredible current probably flowing down these filaments, like absolutely unimaginable, both current and magnetic flux going down these filaments. And there's a presentation we just shared, which was by Alexander Shishkin in response to the paper in Nature Scientific Reports that I wrote with the team in Taiwan, Binju and Huang. And he said that in experiments in 2017, in their cavitation device, which is producing charge separation, is producing some of the same phenomena that is seen in the thunderstorm generator, he had an iron bolt at one end of along the spindle side, and a vast amount of iron was transferred from that bolt in a very short period of time. And in another experiments that they were conducting in 2000 and I think 7 to 9 period, they had another one where they had a copper heat exchanger going into water with a diaphragm pump, and a large amount of copper was transferred. Now, copper is spin isotope, iron is obviously ferromagnetic. These things are influenced by these structures, and I believe he said that there must be some phenomenal current that's transporting this material from one side to the other. And I think it's these structures that are able to transfer these material around. So I think that the charge separation is going on not only there, but it's also obviously going on in the combustion process itself. So when the fuel is exploded and ignites, then you've got the hot flue gases coming out into one end of the thunderstorm generator. And this is going around in one vortex. You've got charged particles going around in one vortex, and what appears to be happening is, because it's coming in at the top, it's coming in from one side. It's actually coming in with shear going in one direction, and then it's got shear in the other direction. You actually have a 3-axis shear, which is absolutely perfect for twisting these things up into these toroidal clusters. There's a good paper, I think, by Dijkhuis, who is a ball lightning expert in Henk's neck of the woods. We tried to go and visit him, but he wasn't very sociable, let's put it like that. But he has a paper that was published in the New York Physics Journal or something, I think around about 2002. I've discussed it in the past, where he talks about these filaments that get formed, and then when they can be divided, like taking a rubber band on a table, and as you roll it along the table, it twists up into a twisted filament, and then it breaks off, and you get magnetic reconnection. Then you get a smaller torus, and then that gets twisted up into a smaller torus, and then that gets twisted up into a smaller torus. So you have this very rapid process of going from a very large magnetic flux loop that is reconnected into extremely large numbers of very small magnetic flux loops that are connected. And what I argue is that these things, they connect together. They're only, because they're actually not just a straight current loop or a magnetic loop, they actually have this toroidal moment. They link together with their toroidal moment extremely fast. And Ken Shoulder says it's an electronic structure that builds at electronic speeds. And so I believe this is happening on one way, and because you have that flash steam and that electrostatic boiler effect going on the other way, you've got charged particles coming in and going around in a vortex. There will be separation of those charged particles in a vortex, because that's what happens in Anatoly Klimov's inflow system, where he has a vortex going in with a Tesla coil, and he does a plasma discharge. N-Gate doing basically a simile of this, and they have the air vortex going around, and he has massive charge separation between the center of the vortex and the outside. So if you could imagine that kind of things happening on the sphere as the gas is coming out of the engine, and at the other end it's going around in the other way, but you've got the same kind of charge separation going on, but it's reversed. And as they come down to the middle, Malcolm would call this the 0 point. You've got these battling charges going on, but I think what you end up with is self-organization, and the self-organization in some of our systems, like the vibrator plates of Roish and Amaza and the ultra experiments, comes down to sound. And in this case, and it's the same in the plasma supernova reactors. In the supernova reactors, you've got a spherical resonant chamber in your microwave, and what you get is ion acoustic waves. Ion acoustic waves. These are where you've got your charge separated material, and you get standing waves within that structure. Now, not only do you get standing waves within the volume in the supernova reactor, you have a sphere with another sphere on the outside in the thunderstorm generator. So unlike the flat plates in Amaza's vibrator plates, where you've got multiple vibrator plates like this, and you get standing waves here, right, between them, or where you've got the flat aluminium sheet with a piece of polycarbonate above and a transducer below, and you get standing waves, and the aluminium moves to a standing wave node, and it produces the yin-yangs. In the thunderstorm generator, you have a sphere on the outside and a sphere on the inside. Any vibration at all will naturally find some standing waves on those spheres. And I believe that that is part of the process of organizing the ions and the charge generally into these structures that organize themselves on the spheres. And then because you've got positive charges moving preferentially to one side and negative charges moving to the other, and then you've got this ion acoustic wave self-organization process occurring, the magnetic charges will form, and once they start forming, they are literally pulling everything into that point. And so it's a self conditioning process. So Malcolm's noticed this in some of his experiments, where he runs the experiment with the bubbler and the ionizing chamber, and then once it's been conditioned, it seems to do most of the job without those things. And I believe it's because, and you can see this in Henk Uren's experiments, when we've got the anode and the cathode in the Vega experiments, you'll get these positions where what they call balls of fire in a 2001 Japanese journal article, but they're basically ball lightning hemispheres, okay? Because the actual structure of the ball lightning's stuck to the iron, right? When you turn the power off and you turn them back on, they immediately appear in exactly the same place, like instantaneously, right? So they leave a signature of organized matter, and probably the magnetotoroelectrical radiation that's been produced has produced clusters, and they bound onto that paramagnetic material or that ferromagnetic material. So I think Malcolm, could you speak to some of your experiences with respect to the preconditioned generators? You need to unmute. Are you still there, Malcolm? Yeah.
Unmute.
Yeah, you're there.
I didn't do that, by the way.
I muted you earlier because there was some noise in the background, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So we've had in the initial, like we did the smaller. I think the smaller generators were in Thailand. They're the oldest because that goes back now 2016. So you're talking about 8 years old, but they still had kept the charge in the material. So, for example, and how you test that is you simply put it on an exhaust pipe without the rest of the kit on it. That is, there's no negative charge, net negative being introduced to the center. There's no vacuum coming through the center. But when you put it on the small one after 8 years, and with the 24-inch and 18-inch sphere, it was about, it would have been 5 or 6 years that we hadn't used it. Yeah, but when we put it onto the Caterpillar, it still reduced the pollution by 50%, even though, and that happens for, it's interesting too, the boys reported to me while I was in India, the boys were continuing on the test work here in London, and they reported that the 24-inch long sphere pipe joining the two spheres, the two 4-inch spheres, would go for keep doing that for 20 minutes, whereas the shorter 8-inch pipe between the spheres would only do that for about, about 5 minutes or so. So there was a relationship between the length of the joining pipe and the amount of charge that was stored still there. And what happens after 20 minutes is, I believe, that you've got a net negative charge or spin in the plasmoids to a clockwise spin, and then it discharges against the positive net charge of the exhaust, and actually will work until it gains a net positive charge, and then doesn't work. So, but it's interesting that it can store apparently that charge for years.
And of course, Ken Shoulders said that an exotic vacuum object will stay in the metal indefinitely, and it'll be there until he intentionally blows it up. And so, you're arguing that it stays there indefinitely until it's intentionally discharged, and I would argue that's or it's the charge or the structure is balanced out.
Because I think it's fundamental to the structure of the metal or the cube, because I view the cube as being, the 6 planes that come together and create, the cubical structure. But you've got they're effectively, I think, the plasmoid center in them, because they're actually an aerial, so they're always receiving energy if they're centered inside that, and they're quite happy to stay there because they're constantly, being excited by the sort of the aerial effect of a perfect cube. Like, it's absorbing energy, and whatever energy comes onto those faces is actually projected into the center if that thing's been perfectly annealed and has no stress fields on it. That would mean there's no center.
Okay, so Jan, do you have another question? You're muted. Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I forgot. I have lost my question sheet here, so I don't have any.
Okay, so I'll just share something that I was talking about earlier, just to clarify, potentially for you, if it'll let me do that. It's gonna let me do it. Right? Can you see this? No, they can't. No, they can't see it on YouTube. So I'm gonna have to do what I did before, which is tedious. I have to find a better way of doing that. So this was Henk Uren's Vega experiment. And if I play this, essentially this is just a couple of frames. You can see what I was referring to here on the anode with the regularly spaced balls, but also on the cathode. And this is because it kind of made a virtual anode cathode arrangement. But what was happening here is these clusters were forming, and they're regularly spaced as well. But it would appear that fluidized electrons were forming, and what you've got here is a brass sheet, and it was on top of another brass sheet in the other aspect. And underneath this cathode, it started producing these 1 millimeter magnetic fluid that then spread out in between the two brass sheets and consumed part of the material. And when we looked at sort of this area over here, we saw our iron-rich crenellated spheres and this other material, which is typically mostly carbon. And you have this round the azimuth, the accretion disk of this structure. You often have the carbon only here. This is absolutely perfectly clean here. But sometimes when you see these things around the equator, it has the carbon here. Now you can imagine that this is like a mini planet Earth, and you've got maybe a pole up here and a pole down the bottom, or whatever's happening. It has an accretion disk. And here's another look at this same one, but I've come out a little bit. And here is the spectrum of a ball lightning that was caught by a Chinese team and published in a major journal. And you can see it has calcium, silicon, and iron. And the major components, other than the carbon, which I was saying goes around here, you have iron, oxygen in the core, silicon and oxygen in fragments a little bit further out, and calcium and oxygen further out from that. So these are the components that we see in a blown up ball lightning structure, and it matches the spectrum of natural ball lightning. And you can see how this crenellated sphere is very similar in form to the crenellated sphere from natural ball lightning. And if we go down, this is the kind of structure. So keep that in mind, hold that in mind. This is 20 microns or so across. This is one of the first ones that was found on Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator. And you can see here, this is about 10 microns or something across. Extremely similar structure. And here is another one, same kind of structure. This is a 5 micron one, so this is a 10 micron one. And pulling out further, we can see here that in these hexagonal or pentagonal deposits that were regularly spaced, and this is a 20 micron distance here, so this is like 20 micron. You've got a distance of, say, 30 microns between these center points. This is typically either silicon or iron, because silicon is the precursor synthesis to iron. The carbon doesn't go into the core because it's diamagnetic, but the core has to be iron. And so these are 30 microns apart, and assuming that it's 24-inch sphere, and assuming that these are regularly spaced, then there is about 129 million medium-sized interaction sites. When we are looking at these smaller ones here, there's smaller ones here which are self-similar to the larger ones here. There's the smaller ones. They're about 5 microns apart. And when you do the maths on that, you're up into the sort of quadrillion type reaction sites for the potential process that may be going on. So I'll just stop sharing that. Okay. So, did you get your questions back?
The question sheet, no. I'll look for it. Just a second.
Okay. So, Martin, have you got any questions whilst Jan's looking for his questions?
Yeah, I guess I got one question. The with the pan scrubs, I guess with them having like that kind of ribboned surface, does that help the bubbles that are forming in there collapse onto that when it collapses in on itself and becomes a plasmoid? And
I from my point of view, I think because there's definitely bubbles produced in there. There's definitely bubbles of a vast range of scales, and there's definitely a negative pressure regime when the draw is coming from one part of the cycle, and then that rapidly transfers to this extremely high pressure regime, which is pushing back down on there. From my point of view, it's what you want in any of these systems is large parameter sweeping, and when you've got those two Mars vibrator plates, we found that in certain places, on different plates, it wasn't in the same place every time. It was just the parameters were correct for the formation of the vortex and the counter vortex, which is the signature of the core of these plasmoid-like structures, right? The same is going on when you see the yin-yangs on the foil. It's the core of the overall structure that would form these energetic yin-yang type structures. When you've got that pan scrubs in there, you have all of these different bits of the pan scrubs at all different angles. You've got all different size bubbles, so the statistics are in your favor for some of them doing the job that you want them to do. You know, the statistics are getting a lot higher. So this is where I'm more minded to agree with Malcolm's claims about the purpose of those aspects of the bubbler. One thing we didn't address earlier, before Malcolm gives his viewpoint on that, is the sealing, which was done rather well, because this part of the system, there was a bubbler in the GEAT, but it was essentially just the returned fluid or some other component coming in, air, let's say, through a mix of fluid, and there wasn't these meshes in there that Malcolm has and the diffuser as such. But what Paul Pantone did very well is he used standard sort of con-flat sealed devices where you have a copper ring and it will seal every time. So these kind of approaches, once you know that what it's doing and why it's doing it, then it's valuable to have that. Now, actually, I can actually answer one question of Jan that he had, which was, can you have just plain water in the bubbler? The question is answered by, as far as I know, it's always just plain water. All I've ever seen going into these things is plain water. Now, you could add some additives in there, but I don't know whether you're going to be really gaining much. It's just going to complicate the situation. Does it run on pure water? I haven't seen it run on pure water. I don't think it's running on pure water. How much more efficient can it be? For similar systems in the past, it depends on how efficient your engine is. If you've got an engine that's really inefficient, you might get a 60% gain. But if you've got a really efficient engine, you might only optimally get a 15% gain. The point being is that from my point of view, it's about emissions. So if you take out carbon monoxide, I'm absolutely shocked to my core with the dangerous levels of carbon monoxide that come out of those generators as stock. There's like up to 3% of the gas coming out of those generators is carbon monoxide. It's 3,000 parts per million, right? And if you look at the manuals, three times in the Honda manuals, it says in a big warning box, you've got to have this 25 feet away from a building with closed windows and doors, right? Any closer, and basically death is not our excuse. You know, we've warned you. If people die or they have brain damage, it's not our problem, right? But this is the warning. And they say it 3 times in the instructions for that generation of... and I was totally shocked. Like, Malcolm put me in a room for the best part of half a day, best part of a day, actually. with this thing running a few meters away from me, and with only the couple of garage doors cracked a little and a door open. And I wasn't getting a headache, but I did have a carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide monitor and stuff on me, like a personal dosimeter. And I'm thinking, well, you know, carbon dioxide rises, so this might be filling up from the carbon monoxide rises because it's lighter than air. Yeah, some people think it's heavier because carbon monoxide is heavier, but carbon dioxide is lighter, so it goes up, right? Then it fills from the top down. So I'm thinking, I should be dying right now if this isn't doing what Malcolm's claiming. And so I went over, and you can see the video on our YouTube. I literally put it so it is, I guess, 3 to 4 inches away from the exhaust. And yes, it does scream at me because the limit that it has is at 25 parts per million. And you can be exposed to 25 parts per million. Let's say it doesn't cause you any problems for an 8-hour working day, right? And it maximally went up to 197 parts per million. 197. And now Malcolm didn't know I was going to do this test. I just did it because I didn't want to die, and I wanted to work out whether my detector was working or not, because it hadn't gone off at all, and I was only a few meters away from this in mostly a confined space. And so the following day, I showed the guy that works there, and he was talking about, yeah, you know what, when you go near a motorway, these things go off. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's why they don't allow you to get out of your car on a motorway. It's not about being run over. It's that you're literally breathing in very toxic levels of fumes, right? And I said, well, it didn't go on, and it was only 197. And so the following day, I asked Malcolm, look, can we test one of the control generators, that unmodified reactors? He said, oh yeah, I haven't done that for like 5 years. So he brought it outside. He turned it on, and I kid you not, I must have been 7 or 8 meters away, and just the turning on of the device, it sent my thing screaming at me, and I was 7 to 8 meters away from it outside. So you can see the test I did the following day, and even 2 meters away, it was going over limit, which is 500 parts per million, right? So I can easily imagine that it's producing 3,000, but it can't read it. Because it's, 30,000 parts per million. It's much bigger than I'm saying. Forget what I said before, 30,000 parts per million. It's absolutely massive that these can produce. Okay, so Malcolm, do you want to rewind on the first point that Martin made? If Martin can just re-ask the question.
Sure. Yeah. So I was just asking about the pan scrubbers and the ribbon part of it, if that was like helping with the bubbles collapsing onto. So I was just trying to understand that part of it a little bit better.
Malcolm?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, so I think there's several aspects to that. And just as a general principle, I think I always like to go back to first principle, and I think about all this in form and function and not names, because I think that if you name something, I spent 7 years on my island trying to forget all the names and trying to just think of it in terms of form and function. And so, it's just a different way around it. I just think in processes, not in names, because names sort of cover the process, or it's a lazy thing. You just say a name and then that's it. You don't think about how it's actually working. So I think the thing is, but I'd like to, so what you're trying to do as a basic principle, and I agree with what Bob said about the electromagnetic fields, because you want obviously the oxygen to be the big bully in the classroom with 18,000 times the magnetic field, throwing the poured hydrogens against the wall. So they're the bullies in the playground here. But of course, the kryptonite for them is ionization, so they become pretty weak if they get ionized and turn ozone. So that was Bob's point, which is valid. So and I think what the idea was, which I have enormous, I spend a lot of time, and I'd just like to make, actually, I've been watching the comments, and there's a few comments here that people have been making about can you do it in glass and stuff like that with obviously we have the polycarbonate. The reason we have the polycarbonate in the bubbler is so as it doesn't, the charge runs along the surface basically, and basically with the ionizer, as said, we don't want to over ionize it, but the prime objective is to produce bubbles you can't see. So basically that means whatever you're doing, you need to try and, I had a sort of like a speaker thing where I have the diffuser in the center of a cone so that as it comes out, it automatically gets moved away from each other. And then the scrubbers, they actually move. If you see it in slow motion, as Bob said, when you've got a perfect vacuum, you get this jerking motion as it goes up, 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 up. So, and that means that you're getting a good pulse. And if you're not getting that pulse in slow motion, and remember, you have to watch everything in slow motion here because you can't see what's happening without having a sort of a good slow motion camera, 240 frames a second at least. But if you get that linear move up every time, it means and then you've got that tide line, which actually as postulates the back pressure from the flash steaming, and also, but I'd also say probably flash steaming, Bob, but also in that process, there's also a flash charging, if you like, of the plasmoids as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's many things happening in there that can create a pressure or a shock wave, a pressure wave and a shock wave. So coming back into the bubbler chamber, and that's why I made the bubbler chamber very thick walled in the polycarbonate, and so that, as I said, so the scrubbers, as Bob said, are designed to make the bubbles smaller, to cut down the size of the bubbles. So, from the macro bubbles to the micro bubbles, and to get that shear on the edges. And and then above that, we just usually have a plastic mesh, which is a sort of a plastic pot scrubber. Basically just lets it through and just stops the splash. And then normally, if it's working very well, you get this brown foam, which disappears as soon as you turn the thing off. You do get a brown foam up to 6 or 8 inches thick on top of those scrubbers, so that you do have the concept that's stopping any splash or any water coming up through the system, because obviously we just want water in its gas phase and the plasmoids coming through, latched onto that. And if you look at my notes, as said on strokefoundation.earth, you'll see that I've made up a model which shows that if you've got a negative charge plasmoid, that the negative will pull the hydrogen in and put all the oxygen to the outside. And my argument is that is the force multiplier that we're talking about. We're talking about a geometric structure that's actually a force multiplier of the charge. Because if you've got on one side of it, if you've got the net positive plasmoid coming out of the exhaust, having discharged its negative charge because of the high positive charge, and actually one of the guys he was talking about in the comments here was talking about I think the Stanley Meyer and his car, and he was in the combustion chamber. I just wanted to point out to everyone that what Stanley Meyer had in his car, which everyone talks about the water car, but in my opinion, the most important thing out of Stanley Meyer's work was that he replaced the spark plug with a plasmoid generator.
Which had a laser in it. And that's something that I think everyone needs to realize, because in this thing about let's not talk about plasmoids for 65 years, let's punish everyone who does. And that's still ongoing. But you got to understand that what Stanley Meyer did was his biggest crime to establishment was to openly replace a spark plug with actually a needle that then effectively created a smoke ring and rolled off net positive charge plasmoid in air
which effectively did the magic in the combustion chamber, and I rebuilt most of Stanley Meyer's stuff, including that plasmoid gun, and it is very effective. The other thing I saw was the 4.
I thought we agreed you weren't going to talk about that.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. It's just between you and me and everyone else.
My filter fell off. Yeah, and on the 432, I also want to mention, because there's a lot of comments on the ratio 432, and I think everyone has to understand that in this, and I'll answer some other questions here, because some people are saying we can make it out of glass. So I think you could, make the whole thing out of glass if you wanted to, and make it screw together or something. But that's only 50% of the effect. The 50% of the effect, I'd suggest, is simply from the geometry of the machine. I was just spoke to Bob about that today, how I actually isolated the two systems by having a 6-inch pipe and then having a 4-inch pipe and then a 3-inch pipe for the inside. And between the 4 and the 3, I put a vacuum and I put argon and tested, if I isolated the inside pipe, what would happen to the effect. And there's two effects here. One is the effect in the increase of power of the motor, and the second effect is the reduction of the pollutants. So there are different designs to maximize one or the other, and that's all about the constriction in the joining pipes, mainly by changing the diameters of those, but keep them resonant, like keep them, all in the inches, like, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, or, sort of 2-inch, 1 inch. So you want to keep an octave. I keep an octave ratio on the joining pipes, but I keep the 432 ratio. And there's somebody asked here, and the thing is whether it works without the 2-inch. Yes, but not as well. I took out the 2-inch when I was doing the high energy stuff that you can see there, where it's bright red, and you can see a lot of those filaments that are actually coming to the outside of the sphere, which you can see when it's glowing red, and that's, as Bob says, overcharging the system, and you start to see those things. I wanted to avoid that, and keep everything to a reasonable temperature for inside the engine bay. But going back to the 432 ratio, the reason that's very, very important is that in my economy, that I think of the thunderstorm generator, it did not come from the Geet reactor in my mind. It came from the Wrong-Hills tube, where you've got the
Rank-Hills, yeah, right, yeah.
Rank-Hill tube, yeah, of separating the charges, and separating the hot goes out annually one end, and then it's in the same thing. The whole principle of the reactor was that it would separate out the, if you like, protons, electrons, one way and the other way. So, and that if it had a stainless steel tube in there, if it wasn't in the same thing, that it'd still do the same, because for every force there's an equal opposite force. So if you've got an expanding hot gas on one end, then you'll have a contracting cold gas going the opposite way. Just for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that's very simple. And if you add to that, the resonance is so important, because what I was doing in my mind was thinking that if I want to change to increase the potential difference and the charge separation, if you have an anti-clockwise spin, and you'll see that in the latest pattern, the anti-clockwise spin on the exhaust gas, and both on the inlet and the outlet, and that you have a clockwise spin in the direction of flow for the incoming air with the water vapor and plasmoids. And obviously when it hits the stainless steel, you're going to have the separation of the hydrogen and oxygen, and the whole thing's already been charged by the imploding bubbles and by the ionizer. So that means that what I was trying to do is, if you take the 432 and 234 I think that if you look at time itself, that the spheres, to my mind, are actually affecting. One is the expanding is death and destruction, is accelerating time, and the contracting and imploding is a life force, and it's reversing time. So basically, that's the concept. So if you've got those two things, then you create a time dilation, and that's how I think that's really how it's working. But conventional terms is what we've used, and conventional thinking, but it's not a conventional device. If you take the 51.84 angle, and you need to, and society hasn't realized this yet. When it does, it's going to change engineering, is because you've got the 51.84 is the angle of the Cheops pyramid. The distance that Moon travels in 24 hours is 51,840, again 5184. If you add up the volume of my 4-inch, 3-inch and 2-inch spheres, it's 51.84 square inches. If you take the 6 days of creation, it's 518,400 seconds. And if you multiply that by 60 arc seconds, it is the Brahma all time, which is meant to be one spin of our galaxy, 300, which is 311 trillion and 40 billion years. So time itself has been ignored and not understood, but I understand time as being 518400 is the product of equal and opposite forces. So if you look at the 0 point as being 0, and you put 5184 on my plasmoid unification model, which I point out the paradox, and on that model, and it solves the unification model, because it resolves the paradox of if you have all time, you have no time. So 24 hours is 0 hours. If you have all compass points, you have no compass points. If you have all directions, you have no directions. So you have the 360 and 0 on the same point. And if you have all time, you have no time. And that's the 0 point. So basically, and that's the paradox. What I would suggest is the thunderstorm generator is the first modern day application of the primal force of the universe, which is simply accelerating, reversing time. And if you had a glass model, you would find.
Can I step in there, Malcolm?
Yep.
Yeah. So I would agree that these structures are able to accelerate and decelerate time from the point of view that if you take, for instance, a radioactive decay or any random process, if you're going to, what is time? Well, time is the progression of things from one state to another. So a chemical reaction, a signal traveling down a wire, a radioactive decay. If you prevent electrons from behaving in the normal way that an electron behaves, or a photon, if these things are either sped up or they are slowed down, then a chemical reaction cannot occur. A signal can't travel down a wire, or a decay cannot occur. Or conversely, they can occur faster. So these systems seem to have superconductivity in them. But for instance, there are patents out there that have magnets, and they arrange them like south-north and then south-north, and they put a radioactive sample in between, and they claim that this will, let's say, accelerate the decay of a radioactive sample. When you flip the poles so they're butting, then it slows down or stops, or certainly slows down the decay. So something that is in the part of the flux of the magnetic flux is changing the rate of decay of those isotopes. Now, it's one thing that's known, for instance, particularly in cavitation, and this was shown by Kladoff, and it was shown by Amaza, and it was shown by the hydrowave systems that we used previously to deal with nuclear and biological weapons, and once those had finished, they had replicated Kladoff. They were able to remediate nuclear waste in beta isotopes, which are essentially either they're emissions of an electron. So whatever it is, it's affecting the way the electron is bound to the nucleus of the atom. So that is a change in the way that electron can behave. And so you're effectively accelerating time by accelerating the process of the decay. And I think that will happen in your system. So it may actually, you talked about leachate earlier and the way that you could potentially clean up the leachate. And I know you've got ongoing experiments with that. But if you had radioactive effluent or low-grade material, it might actually be a system that could accelerate that process. So yeah, the systems do deal with time. I know in the systems that I've seen, in terms of the simple ones, you don't have this 51.84 or whatever it is angle on those, but you are building those into the ones that will be shipped out for the replicators. That's right, yes?
Correct, yeah. And the transitions and also the spheres themselves, as I said, are literally 51.84. And that's why, and the 432 there is actually from the radius of the sun, because, and if you look at my plasmoid unification model, you will see that everything is related, that it does, coherently relate all disparate things. And that's the first, in modern times, I believe, the first example of a real unification model by which you can have on the same diagram crystal form, color, sound, your music, also frequencies as well, all split up by putting them on the 64.32 plane model. So, and
excellent. So just to try and capture all the questions that we have, Kishan had a question. He put his hand up and he put it down. Did you still want to ask a question?
Well, you were kind of answering it. So it was about using CO2. It was just a random thought I was having when you guys were talking about different types of water, and I was thinking with seawater, because you've got a massive problem with CO2 absorption at the moment, and I was wondering whether would this technology could it be used for possibly even like cleaning seawater or using seawater and actually.
Well, I can say that I suggested if it genuinely is dealing with CO2,
yeah,
then you have an opportunity here. If we are to believe that CO2 isn't plant food and we need more of it in the atmosphere, and it's going to end us all if we don't get rid of it soon, then there's an opportunity presented, and we might have some data next week to support one aspect of potentially how the thunderstorm generator is working. So if you recall, I scraped some of the deposits on the inside of the outside of the thunderstorm 24-inch sphere. That's been sent off to a beamline, and it's going to be specifically looking for carbon 13 over carbon 12 and carbon 14 over carbon 12 ratios, and also nitrogen 15 potentially over nitrogen 14. If the nitrogen 15 ratio is out of whack, or the 13 or the 14 is out of whack, so particularly the 13 over the 12 carbon and the 14 over the 15 over the 14 nitrogen, this will imply that there is stepwise transmutation, and in that on that basis, then it could be that when you have oxygen and hydrogen coming in the form of water, and that flashes to oxygen and hydrogen, rather as not as a water molecule, but as oxygen hydrogen, and that comes into the process, the hydrogen is split, it gets its paramagnetic moment, it goes into these clusters, which Malcolm refers to as plasmoids, and you have the fusion of multiple hydrogens and an amount of an electrons into carbon to either produce nitrogen or oxygen. Then what you get out of the end of that is nitrogen that we have not been looking for, right? Because nitrogen is 78% of the air going in anyway, right? And then you have oxygen coming out. One part is because the oxygen isn't transmuted, let's say, from the oxygen in the water. but it doesn't reform water because the hydrogen's gone. The hydrogen's fused into the carbon to produce more oxygen. So, and so in this instance, you have an opportunity where you could take CO2 and put that into the engine as part of the fuel mix, and you are directly sequestering CO2.
And CO2 does work because I put in carbonated water into the machine, and it sends the motor crazy. And that proves that it was part of it. You know, and it works with.
Sorry, do you mean you put it into the bubbler? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so that's an easy test any replicator can do. What is the difference between putting just, you know, what we call per liter water here in the Czech Republic, which is highly carbonated water? What's the difference between putting that into the bubbler over, I mean, it's obviously not going to be lasting that long, but you can always get a soda stream and feed that in, can't you?
But even when you put in the carbonated water, you still don't get it out the other end. So you know, there's still this extinguishment of the carbon. So, and I think it actually, by having high levels of carbon in it, what I've maintained is it's not only that you're getting rid of the output of the engine in the sense of, you know, the main culprit, carbon monoxide, but also reducing down the, you know, most of the test is, you know, when you've got a properly configured and properly treated thing. That's why I wanted to send out, I emphasize that I want to send out the properly designed and treated materials so we don't get sort of people putting their own thing together and then not getting the results they should for other reasons than the design of our device.
Yeah,
so
I mean, we might have a hard answer next week as to part of the process that's going on. In my view, the process is definitely there. It's the same process that occurs in nature, and we've seen it in several other over-unity and nuclear transmutation systems with exactly the same product produced by different authors in different periods of time. Something that we can replicate at will. If we find nitrogen-15, that implies that there is neutron synthesis. However that's occurring, right? There is a proton, it's taking an electron in, it's making a neutron. If we find an abundance of carbon-13, again, it's producing a neutron, right? And this implies that you can get stepwise production all the way up to, let's say, carbon-14, because that is 2 neutrons going into carbon. And what does carbon-14 do? It decays, right? It decays back to nitrogen-14, okay? But that normally takes, what is it, 6,700 plus or minus 30 years. But I've argued that within this intense magnetic flux system, that will happen very, very quickly, right? So you'll get the nitrogen synthesized that way. But here's the thing. This beamline that I sent the sample to, they said, so what is the sample from? I said, it's from an internal combustion engine. And they said, well, why do you want to look for nitrogen? Why do you want to look for carbon-14? Because, of course, it's all fossil fuel. It shouldn't have any carbon-14 in there, right? Shouldn't have any. And I said, it's because of the special way this may be working. I want to see if there's any carbon-14. So whilst it might be remediating a lot of the carbon-14 instantaneously, we do know that LENR has been proven to produce tritium, right? And that's because tritium is the first radioactive isotope that is, how should we put this? It's, what isn't it? Oh God, I had it at the top of my head. It has a different property and it gets kicked out. It's fermionic, not bosonic. So like if you make a deuterium, it's bosonic, so it stays in there. But if it adds another neutron, it makes tritium, it's fermionic, it gets kicked out of the condensate. Right, so you can actually synthesize that. Now, the thing about carbon-14, the nucleus is not fermionic; it's bosonic, right? So it's likely to stay in and get transmuted. But if your cluster breaks up or gets destabilized, or the situation breaks down and it doesn't get to transmute back into nitrogen-14, then you might be synthesizing some carbon-14. If this happens, it completely writes the book on carbon dating. Totally. It will have literally earth-shattering implications for whole fields of science. So next week is either going to be extremely boring, quite interesting, or earth-shattering.
Okay, so I'll come back to you on that question, then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the idea that you can get paid carbon credits for driving a big guzzling car and say, look, I'm doing my bit for the environment. Look at all that carbon dioxide. It's coming out as nitrogen.
More just building actual, like, you know, and like an entire energy system next to coral reefs that are getting the acidification happening to them and just cleaning the
here's
water
the thing.
would be amazing.
Yeah, here's the thing. Right now, all of the time we're using the current amount of carbon-based economy, the hydrocarbon-based economy from whatever, fossil fuels or abiotic production of oil and gas, whatever, that carbon dioxide's going into the atmosphere. The entire world's use of that, every year we don't use the methane hydrates that is evaporating from the tundra, is equivalent over 100 years of 29 years of our current use of hydrocarbons. So we should just put a moratorium on stopping hydrocarbons and convert to using methane hydrates. Now, there's enough methane hydrates in the world to run our current economies globally at the same rate we're currently using hydrocarbons for 300 years. So we should be using, it shouldn't be panic about carbon dioxide. It should be, let's deal with the methane hydrates. That's a much bigger problem, right?
Yeah, but it's less of a panicking about the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more of the carbon dioxide in the water, which is
it's a story that was started with the invention. It was the story that started the invention the year before I was born in 1971 about global warming, which has changed names several times. It's now global boiling. I think the latest one was last year in the UK. The world is boiling. And it's a narrative to manipulate and control societies.
No, that part I would probably agree with you. I was just speaking with a friend of mine who's a international biologist, and he's been working on coral reef systems recently, and just there's a lot of degradation going on, and just the corals not being able to handle the amount of
and yet the Great Barrier Reef has some of the lowest amount of bleaching for like decades this last year. And when I flew over the North Pole on April the 15th last year, it was absolutely chock full of ice on April the 15th, like almost all the way down to the Norwegian coast. Because I had to fly back that way because you can't fly over Russia. So when I visit Matsumoto. So like you had one of the largest ice packs last year, and you had some of the lowest amounts of coral bleaching. So, you know, but they've still got to keep the global boiling narrative going on. So I want to take that off the table. And if they're serious about fixing any climate issues, we should be dealing with the methane hydrates because, you know, we should be using it. So, and the thing is, the system that I saw in East London, sorry, is that giving too much of the game away, Malcolm? This 400 kVA gas generator, it uses methane, right? So it's a direct swap in for using these methane hydrates. So, like, the system has already proven to a degree. There's some issues I have with that particularly because it had a diesel blower to overcome the fact that they couldn't modify the generator because it's tied into the grid. So they can't modify it in ways because they won't let them modify it. Right, Malcolm?
I think the fifth.
You're pleading the fifth. Okay. Yeah, probably best. All right. Well, since you don't want to talk about that, do you want to talk about the fact that we were talking earlier about the intense pressure that's generated, and you want intense pressure to create powerful engine, right? You had a recent analysis done of the sump oil for a short period of time running on one of these generators. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, it's you know, it's exciting when you get a result that simply, you know, like it's a peripheral result, but it's not a core result, I would say, but it's all points to the same direction, because we had obviously your SEM work, which is fantastic, the crenellated ion spherules, but we had it's an interesting thing about what's happening where in our system, because actually you've got is the carbon removed because of the plasmoids in the combustion chamber, or is it removed or reconstructed in the thunderstorm generator? So the clear thing was we had an analysis done of the oil had been about, I think about 10 hours in the running. But when we got the sample back today, there was no, there was no soot, there was no carbon crystals in the oil at all. So that, in my mind, is sort of like confirms that our process is, and we've found this anyway, because I think another thing that everyone should know, that if you run our system on an engine for any more than about 10 hours, you cannot get a baseline anymore, because you will have an automatic 50% reduction in the amount of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide coming out of the system without, just from the infusion of plasmoids into the metal of into the valves, into the cylinder sleeve, and into the piston. And that's, so it's actually, in fact, the combustion chamber becomes effectively a thunderstorm generator.
Yeah, so I mean, these are things that need to be established by studying the inside of a long-term working generator.
Yeah, and you can never, well, we've had those, like motors, for example, that remains always the same. If the engine's been run, you can no longer, it won't go back to its original sort of dirty self. It won't go back to like 12% carbon dioxide, 6% carbon monoxide, and hundreds of parts per million hydrocarbons. It'll go to 50% of what your original basing. And that's why when Bob asked us what we are for scientific method, we are running our unmodified machines for exactly the same periods of time, but not at the same time, in case it absorbs some of the plasmoids from the air. But we're keeping the hours on both our standard engine, test engine. That's the one that we pulled outside with Bob. And Bob said, if you put that in that same shed, you couldn't stay in there for a minute of running. It'd just be too toxic, and so, but you could stay in there all day with our technology, which is sort of, is a canary in the coal mine type of thing. Yeah, actually, we haven't. we must say we haven't used any canaries in our test work. But we did
I was shocked because I came back from that test when I saw that, and it was the first time, because I grew up on a farm. My dad often had generators. I was all the time I was using petrol or diesel devices, and I was always breathing in the fumes. And I had literally no idea the level of carbon monoxide that are in those type of devices. And I came back, and there was like one of these half length containers over a hole in the road, and they're obviously doing some work down under the ground. But they had a generator there, literally exactly right next to it, with a barrier around it that was only about 8 inches away from it. So anyone could be standing there talking with their baby in a pram who's breathing in these fumes, right? And it's just, it was totally shocking. And like people were talking on the stream recently, they were saying, they go to a music festival and there's generators all over the place, or you go to a campsite when you're on holiday and people have got generators and it's between you and their caravan and it should be 15 feet away, So, okay, so Livnik, you had a question there.
Yes, it was have you started running any thunderstorm generators for a long time yet? Because I would imagine the sooner you start, the better.
I have not. We are waiting for some units, as we discussed at the start of the thread. Malcolm, what's the longest term you've run one? Typically, I would see this generator in the town here, and it would be working for most of the day for a couple of weeks when they're doing one particular piece of the groundworks.
Yeah, I think that because we started off with this, I went straight to the Caterpillar, a gas, a G3508E electronic Caterpillar, and it is a gas, so it's an 8-to-1 compression ratio for methane, for tip gas, deliberately designed for that. And methane does, because it's just, it's got the 4 free hydrogens, where in a normal situation, actually it's the hydrogen, the longer the chain, the more they're bound, so the less is exposed. So methane's the best reactant in this technology. It's the best fuel. It comes in cleanest, and also it seems to as far as, because I was talking about the 2 reactions of this machine, and I wanted to, for those who want to build one, there's 3 obvious outcomes to this, which may not be so obvious to everyone. But when you're talking about, okay, number 1 is if you made a glass thunderstorm generator, I would propose that would eliminate all of the carbon, well, practically all the carbon monoxide. Maybe, you could have within the variation range of the machine, usually the detection limit is there anyway, so you don't know. It's probably 0, but it may be a little bit above. But the carbon monoxide's removed completely. And as I said, when I did the test work by isolating the inside tube, it seems that 50% of the action is simply the dueling tornadoes. And because in the dueling tornado, what everyone has to understand is the center where those 2 collide, there is no time space. There can be no matter at that point, at that event horizon, because literally you've got a spin that's clockwise and equally opposed to a spin that's anti-clockwise. And where they lock is the equatorial plane, where I think, as Bob said, he's gone to the equator, and on one side it spins left and one side spins right, but there's no spin in the center of the equator. Now, so with the thunderstorm generator, my postulate is that 50% of the action is simply by the geometry, the sacred geometry. That is, you're spinning 2 equal and opposite forces. And that's what's really important too. And I think the subtlety of this, people shouldn't misunderstand. The subtlety of it is that the internal combustion engine is measuring equal proportions and then putting them against each other, which I can't understate the importance of that. And I'll just say that again, they're measuring equal proportions and then putting them against each other, because when that piston pulls down, it's sucking air in, right? It's measuring cup. And then when it pushes out, it's pushing that out. Yep. So it is a measuring cup, and it's measuring out those against each other. And if you have equal and opposite forces, the thing about that is I didn't want to have my reactions inside the cylinders. You do not want to have your reaction of the...
Yeah, I want to step in there, because there is a question here by one of the people on the Zoom, and he's saying, does the prolonged exposure of of the metal elements in the gensets experience degradation over time through exposure to the plasmoids /evos? What if you go and look at the tests that we did with Roy Schneemaser's gas, which we know does this job, right? If you apply that to tungsten, it produces the magnetohydrodynamic structure, which is a quantization of the structures, and it tears the tungsten apart, not just physically, and maintaining its elements. It literally tears the elements apart, and I've made very clear why tungsten, its conductivity and its paramagnetic nature, is unique of the heavy elements. it's easy to fission. When you have metals that are closer to iron, then it's not so much of a problem. But titanium is lighter, and so that also is heavily interacted with plasmoids, and that was also seen in our testing with Amasa. Even when the bolometer is seeing a temperature far below the melting points even of those two metals, it appeared to be vaporizing, and it wasn't a thermal thing. This is a non-thermal process. It's changing the way electrons are able to interact with other matter, right? It's interrupting that process, right? So when you add 10% of a hydrocarbon to a Mars gas, it basically shuts down that ability of the plasma to do the destruction of metals, okay? And so I don't think, and you wouldn't want it to be transmuting material in the cylinder of the engine. I would like to think, and I hope it is the case ultimately, that all of the transmutation and all of this processing is occurring in the double-ended sphere type structure, or certainly the double vortex structure. And certainly that is, I haven't seen in the inside of an engine cylinder, but I have seen in high detail, and I've shared it with you. You've seen what I've seen. It's definitely something is going on interesting in that part of it. So Karen, does that answer your question? And if you just say yes in the chat, it's on the YouTube stream as well. I also would agree.
No.
Sorry, yes?
I was just say yes. Cheers, Bob.
Okay, perfect. And then secondly, I argued before I was introduced to Malcolm's technology that CH4 is the perfect molecule. Why? Because there's everything you need. You take, for every proton, you've got an electron in any atom. That's true of carbon, it's true of protium, right? So CH4 is one carbon and 4 protiums, let's say. You take 2 of those protons and you fuse them with an electron using an antineutrino, and you end up with 2 neutrons. 2 neutrons go into the carbon, 2 protons go into the carbon. What do you get? You get oxygen, right? So the output from the negentropic process that these things do, the negentropic process of taking CH4 and punching that through to oxygen, okay? Now, you know, some of it might end up as CO2, of course, because it's a burning process in the cylinder. But we want to try and capture some of that. Like, some of the fuel doesn't get burned, and maybe it's getting burnt in the exhaust, and so forth. So, but the idea is to remove a sensible amount of the pollution. Sterling, do you want to ask your question? I know you've got a question in the chat, but do you want to verbalize it? Sterling, you there?
I thought, Bob, it might be interesting for the viewers, when I put the jet turbine onto that, I got 3 jet turbines, helpfully dropped off the back of a US Navy truck. And I wanted one of them with that
happened in New York, didn't it? At the turn of the century. Yeah.
The one of them I wanted to have, you know, at the near end of its life, 2,000 hours.
Yeah. It
was an APU, auxiliary power unit with a jet engine. It was completely carboned up. When we put our technology on that, the carbon disappeared within 5 minutes. After 2,000 hours, took 5 minutes for the carbon to disappear. The result that I just shared with you that we got, yesterday is now, that we got the result back on that, that there is no carbon in the oil. And what I want to say is that's the sandpaper that destroys the motor. We've removed that sandpaper from the oil or from the engine thing. But also the other thing is, on top of everything else, what you've got to imagine is that the plasmoids themselves are capable of storing a huge amount of energy in a very short period of time. So therefore, any excess energy in the engine, and even the most astounding thing is when we put it on the turbos on the Caterpillar motor that we ran for 500 hours, when we looked at that, there's no carbon at all in the engine, and everything's pristine, because there is the concept that the plasmoids create an electromagnetic containment field within themselves, but they also, as a hive structure, or as a Borg structure, we are the Borg, is that they actually then create a matrix which effectively creates a force field to protect the metal from excess electrons.
That being said, we literally see these structures tearing the part of the.
If they're overrun, yeah.
Well, from my point of view, a catalytic converter doesn't last forever. What is the lesser evil? Sometimes you need consumable parts in an engine. That's not necessarily the end of it. What we want to not have is toxic fumes going into people's lungs, right? So the idea that iron gets moved from the inner sphere to the outer sphere, but it's still iron, right? That's not much of an issue, right? The thing doesn't change weight; it's just shifted where it's belonging. You know what I mean? But if in the process, because as I said in a recent presentation, there are only two negentropic structures, and one is the tornado, and the other one is the ring tornado, which is the ring soliton, and fractal clusters of that. Everything else is blowing things apart, right? So that's what this thing produces. It produces, in fact, it produces one that grabs stuff together, and it produces one that then deposits it over here. It's like the anti-tornado. It's like the cyclone and the anti-cyclone. But in between, you have a tornado, a twisting filament string. And so you have the negentropic stuff this end, a negentropic tornado end, and then the other end, you have something that disassembles matter. The question is it coming from the disassembly side all the way through to the assembly side? And I think that's probably what's going on. The whole structure is ultimately a negentropic structure. Okay, so if anyone wants to, so by Kushan, that's great. You see the rest on YouTube. Is there anyone else that wants to ask a question? If you want to put up your hand, otherwise I'm going to see if there's any in the chat.
Yeah, I like to ask one final question. I'm very new to this, so I'm not into all your detailed issues. But you said earlier that pure water cannot be used. So there is a mixture, fuel mix. Can you?
I'm not sure. Did I say pure water can't be used?
I think you said not 100% as fuel. You need fuel in it.
Not 100%.
Yeah, you need fuel. You need
the carbon source.
Yeah.
Bob's.
Yeah. In the beginning, yes, but eventually, as it heats up, you can run it on what kind of?
I would argue that you cannot run any plasmoid system on without any carbon source, because
I'd agree.
It would just consume the metal.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So what kind of mixture would you use then?
I think no less than 10%.
Yeah, I mean, Amaza said uses 10% as a minimum. I have not seen it work with less. It might work with less, right? But in the case of Amaza, like if you have zero, if you just use pure Amaza gas, the plasma structures that are produced, they will literally rip through metals and they will transmute them. So they're pulling those things in. I think carbon is diamagnetic, right? And so it orbits around these structures and goes through the center, right? It doesn't actually like to go into the structures. And it basically provides a barrier between the structure that does the work and the metal. If you just have the metal, then these structures are intensely magnetic, right? They want the electrons that the metals electrons are all over the place. They're not really associated with any particular nuclei, and that's why they conduct electricity, right? And so, like, if you have something that really wants to eat electrons, and the metal keeps going, here's some, here's some, here's some, here's some, it's going to fall apart, isn't it? because when you keep removing the electrons from from metal, it's going to fall apart, right? And the more conductive it is, the more it's going to fall apart. Where that breaks down is if you have gold, silver, and copper, which are diamagnetic. So the magnetic structure keeps it away from it, which is why it's good to have the copper pipes, okay, to a degree. But you kind of want the magnetic structure there, magnetic materials, to a degree, so that it locks these things in place. So there are several things going on that, you know, there's a lot of work to be done once you understand the basics. So when the carbon is ionized, it can become, it then has unpaired electrons, and so then it can has a magnetic moment, so it can interact more with the center, but it's still, the actual nucleus doesn't want to go into these structures. It can be synthesized in them and then spat out. But when it goes round, it keeps orbiting around, and it goes through the center, and through the center as well, you have the relic neutrinos, and you have, because they've got spin and they get interacted with, they have their own toroidal moment, and the structures themselves have a toroidal moment, so they go through whichever way it is. And also the hydrogen go through. So you've got electrons orbiting around, you've got hydrogen ions orbiting around, you've got the carbon orbiting around, and they've got this negentropic core. And the negentropic core is what's bringing all these things together at the phase singularity. Where that, I mean, it comes in and there's this magnetic core. The things stop. They basically stop in this core. The reactions take place, and periodically it gets too much and it gets spat out, right? So and this happens fantastically quickly. I think ball lightning. If you go and look at the presentation in 2006. Now when was that? In the Sochi presentation of Zatalepin and Baranov from October 2018, he looks at natural ball lightning and synthetic ball lightning, and I think it's of the order of something like, it's like 400,000 miles an hour or something, miles per second. I don't know. It's something fantastic that the ions spin around these structures. So they're not only spinning around that way, they're actually going through the core like that. So the potential for transmuting incredibly quickly is there. You're gonna have to have some carbon in there, and specifically, if you go and look at the last slide of my ICCF25 presentation, I show two triangular holes either side of a fractal cavitation structure on an Amasa vibration plate. It's triangular because you've got, on each side, you've got three substructures, right? It's weird to think of a rotating thing that has triangular holes, because why isn't it round, right? It isn't round because it's the toruses in the center of each side are arranged as triangles, and they are moving material between them, but that produces the toroidal moment that comes this way. Well, we look at that with EDX mapping, right? And we see that there's oxygen around those structures, but there is like an omega that comes round of carbon up to the center point. You can go, you literally can see it exactly. Everything you need to know is right there in that particular SEM image. And so, yeah, the carbon is there to protect metals from giving up all of their electrons to the plasmoid. And in the process, some of the carbon gets converted to oxygen. In my view, we might have hard evidence that will be a complete slam dunk or highly disappointing next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steen, you had a question.
Yeah, it's not so much a technical question. I was wondering if at this point in time there are any larger corporations which are working with this to develop this and apply this technology, or is it much too early to do that?
Malcolm, I'll let you talk about that. If you want to, you're there, you need to unmute.
Unmute. Okay, yeah. So my game plan here, I did intend a different. My game plan was quite complex, and as I said, it goes along with my. I plan to live forever, and it's going well so far. Yep. So the realities of life are that my game plan was simply having studied what happened to Stanley Meyer and Paul Pantene, and having studied what happened to Martin Fleischmann and met him personally. I'd say that all these things are problematic, but I think that the thing is that what I determined was that I'd go and write my notes, 7 years, write my notes, and then put everything out into the marketplace as open source. I did that with half my notes, and the other half of the notes was obviously we're now using to get some protective patents, not in the sense of withholding people from producing it or withholding it from humanity, but more to stop the deep state ring fence sort of legal actions or minimize the risk to those. I think the big companies and corporations, I've been talking to a lot of them, talking to representatives there of Lockheed Martin, NASA, and I may or may not have agreements with them. If I did have any agreements with them, they'd probably be non-disclosure, non-compete agreements. So I've had a lot of assistance. I can say it was, I think it's fair to say that, unfortunately he's passed away, but God bless him, Michael Melich, the US Navy, arranged for me to see Martin Fleischmann in Salisbury Plains before he died. I spent a week with him, and I very much appreciate that. I've had a lot of assistance, through different corporations and different organisations within the US government, which I'm also very grateful for. I think in this thing you have the normal sort of people trying to look after their bailiwick. They're trying to look after their own interests. So obviously, I've run into a lot of that, and even tonight's another example of it. It's like a dripping tap. It's very annoying when it just keeps coming drip, drip, drip. But I think at the moment we do have, we're moving into the, there's been a big change. I think my goal was to make sure everyone knew about plasmoids and to know that they are the next industrial revolution. And I think that's, what Bob's work, bring it out. And my thing was just trying to understand the form and function of plasmoids. And I spent even a year building models of them to understand the trajectories and the different options that you could have. That's all in my notes. And I built prestigious builder of models. And so I think that there's enough information there now for the big corporates. And we've just been in India. We gave a presentation in India, and Bob supported us there. And we did a presentation in Zurich. Bob supported us there. And we have friends, around the world now. And I think it's fair to say that we've reached a critical mass of people. And if we keep on pushing with the individuals and the test work that we're intending to do, with everyone having, properly constructed and properly treated thunderstorm generators, then we can certainly get a lot of this research accelerated.
Malcolm, I think you could say that there are major government actors that have at least started some research programs. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah.
It's more very, very large government actors that are moving in, and one might imagine if Norway is a candidate, there might be other countries that are sitting on a large oil patch that might have considered this a very good thing to get into.
Yeah, well, I think I will be having a trip to Saudi Arabia fairly shortly. If that answers that question. So, yes, because obviously I was in the oil industry. I'm a doctor of petroleum geochemistry. I'm an oil driller. I'm a mine manager. I'm a site manager. I was the world expert that was called in for the Gulf disaster to help the US government deal with that. I was the prime technical expert there to stop the, the Gulf disaster. So I do have some creds in that area, and it's, what I think is that we have now set a firm basis, because you've got to say it was just simply this, is that the reason that there was so much resistance to this technology is it is the next industrial revolution, and people in power wanted to have all the power. So this could have come out 65 years ago. It didn't, and it didn't because of political reasons, not because of necessity.
I think there's also they could see what it could destroy easily, but they didn't really understand why it was destroying it, what it was specifically doing, and how to prevent it destroying. In particular, with respect to metals, as I've tried to spend a bit of time walking through why it destroys metals. I honestly think the easiest thing to do with this technology is to make things fall apart, right? And there's a lot of people that were probably on the periphery or directly associated with the initial discovery of this that had a vested interest in using it for things to make things fall apart. But I'm more interested in the productive side of what it can deliver. And
we need nuclear power plants, not nuclear bombs.
Yeah,
I mean
that would be the kind of analogy. Yeah. Yes.
And we've got enough nuclear bombs to destroy ourselves many times over. So that's not the issue. But I think at the very base level is that an industrial revolution will help all of society, all of mankind, and basically it'll mean that there'll be enough resources then to deal with any problem that develops. Not.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's a lower end of efficiency gain of 15%, right? That's like finding 15% more oil and gas and coal reserves in the whole world. That's like absolutely monumental. Just that. And then secondly, we spent some time in India, and it probably took me a couple of weeks to clean my lungs out after that, because even I had not spent as much time in a major Indian city in the center as I did when we were in Ahmedabad. And I just really feel for the people that grow up there. They don't know clean air, and knowing what is coming out of just one generator, and they are effectively everywhere, these high carbon monoxide. I can't imagine what's going on to those kids' developing brains, let alone the adults in the room, because you end up with a headache every day. So this is chopping your brain capacity down. And so it's now the most populous nation on Earth. They announced in October they're going to double their coal use, and last month they announced they're going to triple their gas use. And if it's already got most of the top 10 most polluted cities on Earth, the big win here is to clean up those. Even if it doesn't produce, even if it's the same efficiency, we've got to roll it out. And so, it is a prototype. Malcolm, you would agree with me. It's still very much a prototype. But it seems a lot easier to achieve the desired effect than the GEET, and I think that collectively we understand what's going on a bit better. So Steen, you've got another question there.
Yeah, just a comment. From my point of view, it will be important in order to sort of approach some of these larger industries to have test results and technical specifications and so forth, to have all that stuff combined in a written report, because there are a lot of videos out there, but you cannot go to any industry with a video. You need to have these technical reports, where you specify what have you done and what are the results of these efforts that you've done. So I think this is really important in order to do that. And I have some ideas with some industries which might be interested, but I think I would not be able to go to them unless I have some kind of report to show them.
Yeah, we've entered into formal, government. We've had the first in England here. We've had the first, very good interaction with independent, the government's independent assaying guys. we've agreed to a test program and a very specific, we're agreeing on methods of measurement and, measurement machines and stuff. This week, our man in India has met up with the same sort of authorities in India, and that was with the director, and it was a very good meeting, apparently, and very mature. I think actually we've gone with the presentation there, and we have sort of a good relationship with the Indian Navy, as I have a good relationship and had a good relationship with the American Navy. I think just generally now, the whole attitude and the whole the opportunity is now there for the new industrial revolution, because basically they're letting it pass now. Whereas a year ago, you didn't hear about plasmoids, but now people in the coffee shops are talking about it. And so, it's now brought that level of awareness. We're aware that we have to up our game as far as now getting independent testing done. It's interesting that the government agencies seem more mature than industry at the moment, because I think that industry's still, stuck in their own paradigm. And I think that the legislation and the stuff will be pushed through by the government agencies who've got a mandate from the government and the people to solve these problems.
I think that's quite a reasonable thing to say, Malcolm, because what you see with emissions, it comes from, let's say, the European Union. They have these emission requirements, and they give the car manufacturers, say, a window of 5 years or 10 years to hit a particular new emissions requirement. And this has been going on since, I think, the 90s. I think, the removal of lead, and then the amount of CO that can be in an exhaust has been steadily stepping down, and the amount of CO2 per amount of fuel burnt, and other pollutants have been stepping them down. And it literally comes from the governments. Now, it's some collaboration between what the car industry, for instance, they say we can achieve this probably in this time frame. It's realistic because you're going to have to move these cars over. So I think it's probably right that it's coming from government, but there are other industries which I think you're engaging with that have immediate needs. So, for instance, with the generation that is going on, in those instances, they couldn't. How should we put this? They couldn't run more generators than they had at a particular site, because they had a limit on the amount of CO that they could emit, carbon monoxide. If you reduce the carbon monoxide, I think the 4 was the limit, but if you can, they've got space for, let's say, 20, right? And they could produce a lot more revenue from burning the tip gas, or even domestic, natural gas. They could generate a lot more revenue and produce clean energy. But if the carbon monoxide is 1 in 100, they can easily have 10 times the number of generators on that site where they wouldn't legally be allowed it. So there's all kinds of opportunities. And I think also, for instance, there's this whole thing around the world, and there's a group that I'm trying to help in the Philippines that have got the contract to deal with 500,000 tons of water hyacinth on the Lake Laguna, or whatever it is there in the Philippines. And they want to create biochar, they want to create packaging products and fiber-based products and energy directly from this. But when you actually pyrolyze a biological material, there's a hell of a lot of stuff that comes out of the exhaust. It's like you might have a very clear thing that you can make good drinking water with, or you can put in the soil and it retains water and adds nutrients to the soil, or retains, but in the process, they're chucking all this toxic fumes out in the pyrolysation process. So if your generator is able to mitigate the fumes on that, it makes a clean product, cleanly produced. Right, Malcolm? Yeah, I'm going to unmute you again.
There you go. Yeah, great. Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, are engaged with, globally now, especially with India doubling its coal production, or energy production from coal, and there's anyway, just globally we now have the opportunity to. I think the thing is that for everyone to realise is that batteries are not energy generators; they're energy storers and users. So, and it's still the fact that diesel is 100 times the energy density of a normal battery. So, I think keeping the fossil fuels for the time being, and it is a good transitional technology, because out of all the technologies you could bring in, it's the one technology that can is smoothly transition, not out of hydrocarbons, because we'll always need hydrocarbons, but certainly as we understand these processes a lot better, that we can go into producing direct matter to energy drives, which will then transition in the next 10 or 20 years in a very mature, civilized way.
Malcolm, that is a very good point. It's one that I tried to find a way, because my view of the last several years was this technology seems to tear matter apart, but what it tends to do is, if it starts with unstable elements, it ends up with stable elements, right? So if no one wants to allow it to be used for energy, then let's try and use it to clean up, let's say, the 1.5 nearly million tons of tritiated water at Fukushima. And we tried to work through the process. We did 2 different submissions. I mean, it turns out that there was some corruption going on, of course, when large sums of money are involved, and they've changed hands to Mitsubishi. The 9 Sigma evaluators are now being replaced by Mitsubishi, but they actually changed the rules after our second submission to say we don't want to get rid of the tritium. We want to either concentrate it and keep it, or we want to dump it at sea. Those are the only 2 options. So they didn't like our idea of making it extinct. My view of that was to use this technology in a massive industrial way to do a public good, which can then be rolled out across the world, and in the process understand these things much better, so that they could be then used safely in other technology areas. Now, it looks like that is being taken off the table, and so this is one reason I am keen to help your technology, if I can. It's another pathway, as you said, to better understand the technology and how it can be practically used and safely used to do a public good. And for me, cleaning up the air of Indian cities, this is where the next powerhouse of the world is going to be. The aging demographics in Europe, we're past it. America's practically past it, depending on who they let in. And China, because of its one child policy for so many years, it's past it. Japan is past it. Honestly, that's the reality. India has this vast resource of people under the age of 30. Absolutely immense potential. But we've got to allow them to have a clean environment. And this could be the way to do it. And if it is rolled out, like if the Indian Navy are really onto it, if major international bodies get involved, Steen, then we can nail what metals are the right metals, how we can protect those metals. Maybe they could be coated, you could literally coat them with, say, boron nitride. So it has the magnetic attachment, but it has a covalent bond to protect a covalent insulator that doesn't change its conductivity easily when it raises in temperature, like all the other refractory ionic ceramics, like zirconia or alumina and stuff. These all become a conductor the higher the temperature you become, and then they start giving their electrons and they can be consumed by an evo. So maybe a coating of boron nitride, or even pre-coating it with carbon, bizarrely, to protect the metals in the thunderstorm generator. That these kind of things that we can explore And then once we have a much better understanding, and I think we've gone huge strides in the last 3 years, really immense strides in understanding how we can play with these things safely, then we can roll it into other technology areas. And so I know Malcolm wants to go straight to the things that we all want to go to, which is take a lump of matter and convert it directly into movable electrons or propulsion. But I think this is a nice segue, right, Malcolm?
Yeah, it has to be a transition for society. And I think the recognition that plasmoids are the answer, they're the most powerful.
That's it. There's nothing else beyond this.
Yeah, there's nothing, can't go beyond plasmoids. They're the fifth state of matter. You've got solid, liquid, gas, plasma, and structured plasma. Structured plasma, I'd argue, is what we've called over the ages the ether, because I think when it's structured, there's a concept that it's now solid. So in a sense, it's certainly structured and coherent, and also sentient. So, and I think at the end of the day, when our society matures, to the extent that can realize that we took a wrong path when we went to explosive technology, because the implosive technology is clean and the explosive technology is death and destruction and dirty. It's as simple as that. Our current technologies are explosive mainly, and we have to go to implosive technologies because nature uses implosion, not explosion. And in that, we lost our intimate connection with the plasma, and which makes up, I'd argue, plasmoids are everything, but certainly, even if you take the other view, they're 99.999% of the universe. So, you can't argue with 99.9%, or good luck with that. So I think that eventually we'll become, as I did on my island, alone 7 years, getting away from society and connecting back into the source. And the source uses implosive constructive force. And that is the higher consciousness of man. Doing what we're doing at the moment is very base and very primitive and very destructive and not sustainable. So our society will fail if we keep on going the way we're going, because it has to, because we're defying the very laws of nature that we're sitting in.
Well, I mean, on that note, I would say that it is give and take. I mean, when you are taking a carbon atom and you're making it into oxygen, you are literally destroying a carbon atom to make oxygen.
A sacrificial carbon is better than a sacrificial human.
Well, yeah.
Just
but,
my opinion.
But the energy levels that you gain are so far beyond combustion that you can use so much less of a particular material. And once we understand how to do it particularly well, let's say with carbon, then let's this is what we're talking to in the last sort of thread, is let's use, for instance, iron, and like no one's going to object too much with a bunch of scrap iron being converted directly to energy. And if you end up with some nickel or you end up with some copper, then so be it. That's also quite useful. There's plenty of iron to go round.
Yeah, and basically you'd probably a foot of iron and drive your car for the rest of your life, with direct matter to energy drive. So, or a foot of copper would last you probably for several generations. And so we have to get to that mature stage, and I think that it is all related to your greed and fear. So it's a turning point for humanity, and it can either go one way or the other. But I think history tells us that the result of using explosive technologies is terminal, because eventually the society gets big, where you can get away with it when everyone can go out and grab a log of wood. And
I think that's the real problem, is that going out and grabbing a log of wood, you basically destroy habitats. There's plenty of iron in the centre of Australia, and nothing else wants to live there.
That's a very good point.
Not even Australians.
Well, so I think last time we went up there was like 55 degrees.
Yeah. Deeply unpleasant. Okay, so is there anyone in the Zoom that has another question? If not, we're going to wrap up in a second. And I want to thank Malcolm and I want to thank Steen for initiating this call, and Jan, who has had to duck out. Any other questions? Anyone want to raise their hands? Okay, well, so thank you very much, Steen.
Thank you. Thank you. Lots of loads of information here, and really look forward to work with you onwards.
Perfect.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah, and strikefoundation.earth for the information, and you can get the videos on HowTube. I think Malcolm, and we're going to put up the new website, strikefoundation.org. As I said, not for profit, and the aim of this foundation is to educate people. So we want a centre for excellence for plasmoids in every nation, and that every nation has the opportunity, equal opportunity, to develop it, and we shall share, the new advances in the technology, and the same as Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. Yeah.
Perfect. And Malcolm, there is a question: where can we find a blueprint?
Well, they're on my. If you go to, there's blueprints in my notes at strikefoundation.earth.
I mean, are these current blueprints? Because, I think maybe what they're asking for is there are various versions of rough schematics, but they're not what I've seen embodied. So maybe some time needs to be spent on that.
We are upgrading everything at the moment, and because literally I just finished another patent today, and I'll be finishing another one, hopefully, God willing, over the weekend or next week, but the current, we will put out the schematics for the current model. We haven't even done the test work on that yet. We're just putting the pipe work on it now. This is the super stubby. This is we went from a 24-inch, or actually, tell the truth, a 32-inch, which works the best because it's the resonant ratio of 1 inch to 32 inches on a Hilsch tube. So everyone should know that. But then we had the 24-inch, then we went down to the 8-inch test, 8-inch test, and then we went down to the 3-inch test, and now we're the 2-inch test. And I think that will be the best resonance. And that also means that you can bolt it on without affecting the frame of a normal motor, because it's the same 10 inches deep that the current mufflers are on the engines that we're taking off. So that'll fit in, the super stub will fit in the frame, but it also, as we've shortened up that tube, we're increasing the flux and the magnetic effect, and so it's certainly heating up and doing what it's meant to do without sort of any noticeable escape, to Bob's great disappointment at the last visit. But I think this 1 inch will be the thing where there will be some escape at full load of the filaments.
Well, I can't wait to be able to record those. Because we got such beautiful ones in the Vega experiments, and they've already been seen by several independent replicators in GEAT reactors. So I don't want you to be falling behind on the production of.
Well, I actually went the other way. I've been dumbing it down, trying.
Yeah, I know. I don't want you to dumb it down.
I'm trying to make it well. I say, no, hell no. I'm trying to make it.
I want to see those things because I like the fact that they're outside of the reactor, because I can study them with, extra fidelity.
Well, I just view that as them escaping from the cage. We beg to differ on that.
Anyway, because we're coming from different angles.
But we can make you a special one, because it is as simple as this for the listeners, is that it's so fractionally important. If you have an outside, an OD and an ID, there's a huge difference between 1 inch ID and 1 inch OD, and that's all we had to change to dumb it down. If you take it down to a 3/4 and a 3/8 and drive it through that, you'll have obviously a less energy going to the engine, but you'll have a lot of energy coming out of it. So, which I suppose to leave off to the people, there's 3 points. One is what you've got to look at is the extra energy which it does provide to the engine by motive power inside the combustion chamber. It does, reduce the pollution down to, when it's working correctly and properly tuned, then it'll be close to zero carbon monoxide, close to zero carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons, and oxygen at or near atmospheric levels. But the main thing that people should be focused on is that the excess heat on the thunderstorm generator itself is equal to, or at least sometimes double, the actual power of the motor itself. So, and that's an important point that.
Malcolm, these are the kind of things that will come out when there's proper systematic studies, like Steen is referring to.
Correct.
Because and I've said this publicly, I have yet to see one of the engines modified run a load up to the rated load of the unmodified engine. So, and this is where it comes down to the prototype aspect. I've seen them under load because, like, a lot of the complaints with the GEET was that you could always get it to work and do the magic when it was unloaded, but you just couldn't put any load on it at all. So already I'm happier that it can run a load, but I've not seen a device, and that's to do with. I don't want to have any reasons. I don't want to have any excuses, because when I go and buy that Honda and it's rated, the Honda 5000, I can run 5 kilowatts on it or 4.5 kilowatts on it. I want it to be the same, no excuses. It delivers that power as electricity, as rated, and there's no reason, there's no excuse for it not to do that. Like, it just does. And so those studies have got to be done so that it can get to that point. But next week might be a huge week in terms of the evolution of understanding of this, or it might be a damp squib. But regardless, we'll battle onwards. And
but we did do those tests in North Carolina.
Yeah, I know, but like, my view is,
I know you weren't there.
I don't believe anything until I've seen it.
Okay. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, Malcolm, for coming on the call. I think that's a real boon. I don't think Steen or Jan was actually expecting that, so that's good. I think we've had some really good discussions. I think we've learned a lot about where you are, and hopefully when these things can come out. So when can Martin, who's sitting there in the Aurora Borealis there, when can he expect to see his stubby?
Well, we're producing 30 stubbies.
Yep.
We've I think we've got the first one that's rolled off the production line. We're doing them 6 at a time. So, and we'll put them out as they're, like, obviously we have to have the ones for our test work, which will be half of that. But the first 3 will be prioritizing. We are doing work around the world. We do have labs that we've set up in New Mexico and ready for the super stubby. And obviously we just we'll put it fire for effect. We'll put them at the top priority sites first. We're doing the stuff in India. Obviously we've got the support of the Indian Navy there, and they're very enthusiastic and very keen to move ahead. So is the Indian government representatives that we saw this week. So I think that everyone, the idea is to get one to every body in the next 3 months that needs to have one, and then back up and support with, hopefully I'll go around and be able to spend a few days with everyone, at the end of the build. Our build, the guy, I sent a machine to...
he's not doing that because he likes you. He's doing that because he has to keep moving.
The red dot gets brighter every day.
The number of red dots.
So, there I was on my island thinking that I'd come out and everyone had thanked me for the 7 years of work and writing up the technology, and how now you're an existential threat to humanity, apparently.
Good. All right. With that, then I'll thank you very much, Steen. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Tammy, Sterling, and everyone else that joined on the Zoom. Thank you to William Schwant, Corky Goss, Screwdriver Tuny, Tammy also on YouTube, Daniel Foster, Paul Holland. Too many to name. There's 61 of you out there. It's been a real pleasure, and until the next time, I'll see you.
Yep. And big hi to Screwdriver Tuning. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, fellas.